we are recording the session. Yeah, right. So as you know, if you have signed up for this session, you would know that we've got two parts to today's webinar. Yeah. So the first part of our webinar sees our partner organizer, Routledge, sharing their thoughts on publishing opportunities. And part two will see my upcoming edited book project on literacy education. So let's begin with part one. Today, I'm very grateful that Katie Peace, the commissioning editor and publisher for social sciences and humanities books for Routledge in Asia, is here with us. For your information, Katie has at least 18 years of experience in the global publishing industry as she oversees a team of editors in the Routledge Singapore and Australian offices. Katie is responsible for the commissioning of all types of book content in Asia. In addition, her own background in the field of education also sees her commissioning books, particularly in education, linguistics, psychology, and mental health. So today in this first session, Katie and her marketing executive, Christy Kennedy, will share important insights with potential authors who are looking to publish with Routledge. Although this session will only be for an hour, Katie has very kindly promised to allocate more time after today to speak to those who may want to find out more. So ladies and gentlemen, before I hand the time over to Katie and Christy, I ask that participants please adhere to the following requirements. First, please ensure that your microphones and cameras are turned off. And second, Katie will present for approximately 30 to 40 minutes, in which time we ask that participants refrain from asking questions with the microphones. However, you are very much encouraged to type your questions in the chat pane at any time throughout the presentation. So don't worry about the chat pane, go ahead and type it in, yeah? And in the remaining 20 minutes, Katie and Christy will try to answer your questions. By which time, if you would like to use the microphone, you may do so. A quick reminder to Katie and Christy, when you hear the bell, which I will be keeping time with using the bell, it means that you have about a minute to tie up the presentation. So it is with great pleasure that I invite Katie Peace and Christy Kennedy from Routledge to the floor. Over to you, Katie and Christy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Chong Soo Lee and UTP for inviting us to come and present to you today. I'm just going to share my presentation with you. Hopefully this will work. There we go. Okay, so fantastic. As introduced, I'm the publisher for Routledge, Taylor & Francis. I'm based in our Singapore office and I look after authors all across the Asia Pacific region. The presentation I'm going to do for you today even, is about publishing your next or first book, tips to help you succeed. And I'm going to cover all the things you might need if you're planning to publish a book. Although obviously we'd love you to publish the book with us at Routledge, this will be applicable to pretty much any large academic publisher. So please do get your questions ready for the 20 minutes of Q&A at the end. And as Dr. Chong mentioned, I will be available for the next couple of days for one-to-one sessions if you have a book project you'd like to discuss with us. So let's go straight into the presentation. A lot of people ask me who Routledge is because you hear Taylor & Francis, CRC Press, and lots of different names. Routledge is the book publishing brand for Taylor & Francis. Taylor & Francis is the overall publishing company. But if you hear Routledge, that's the social science and humanities sort of book publishing arm of Taylor & Francis. We were founded by George Routledge in 1836, so we're very old and very experienced. We publish more than 5,000 books every year and 2,600 journals. We're one of the top 5 global publishers in the world and #1 in social sciences. So we're a big organization. And in being big, we also have a lot of ways that we can support any authors who work with us. So we have offices all over the world and a few here in Asia, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in China, Japan, Korea, pretty much anywhere you can think of. We have either sales and marketing support or editors like myself. We obviously can do a huge amount of worldwide conference and marketing for your product as well for your book. So that's something that we can do. And editorial, like myself, can be here to support you. So part of what I'm going to talk to you through today is how you would work with someone like myself, a commissioning editor. So in terms of where you start, if you're thinking of publishing a book, the first thing you need to do is think about, do you have a book project, or is it perhaps a journal article or something which isn't necessarily suited to a book? In order to publish a book, you really need to have your PhD, ideally. You need to have done a significant amount of research in your area in order to be able to write something which is going to add something to the field. If you haven't written any journal articles, I would recommend getting a few journal articles under your belt first, just to get that writing experience. If you can get a chance to write a chapter in an edited volume or write a handbook chapter, that can also be really helpful. So think about whether you really have enough research of your own to write a book. Or perhaps you think there's an edited volume potential out there where you can collect a number of you together in one place, in one book on a certain topic. So perhaps you haven't got enough to write an entire book on your own, but you've got a number of colleagues who also have material on the same theme or the same topic. So that's something to think about. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm just going to mention, for those of you who perhaps don't have English as your first language, why a book might be useful just in generally, and why a book in English would particularly be useful. So books are a core component for many universities in career progression, and they give you a chance to delve deeper into your topic than you might find with a journal article. Journal articles are relatively formulaic and they're quite short. So, 6,000 to 8,000 words, often no more than about 10 to 12. Whereas with a book, you have 50, 60,000 words minimum, really, to build your argument, to delve deeper into a subject and connect all of the thoughts and ideas that you might have over a number of years together in one place. They're also a lot more relaxed in terms of the writing style than a journal article. So you have a chance to write in a slightly more informal way. You can write a lot sort of longer form. It's not, as I say, quite so formulaic as a journal article. Books are also much more widely available and accessible. We sell our books through Amazon, through all the bookshops, as well as obviously in physical bookshops as well. So in terms of availability, they're also generally still up to date, up to sort of 5 to 10 years after you've published them, whereas journal articles, as you all very well know, I'm sure, are often out of date within, 6 months to a year. So they're being replaced all the time, whereas books can, good books, will stay relevant for a lot longer. In English, and I know it's easy for me to say because I'm British and I was born a native English speaker, I'm very lucky. But if you want to enter into conversations with your field outside of your local network in your particular country, then really the language that at some point everybody decided was going to be the language of communication for academic study was English. And so if you don't enter into that conversation in English with other academics and you publish just in Malay or just in Japanese or Korean, only those people who speak that language are going to be able to read and understand and kind of build on your research. So in order to exchange your ideas internationally and build that global reputation, ideally you would put something in English so that people can build on your research. They can invite you to conferences. They can get a handle on what it is that you're working on. So I think that's quite important. And whilst it's not easy, we are, as a publisher, very keen to try and help you and support you, even if your first language is not English. So my job, based in Singapore and working with Asian authors, is to try and help you get over some of those hurdles that exist for people who are not native English speakers as well. And I can talk more about that if you'd like to ask me any questions at the end as well. Okay, so you're pretty sure you want to write a book. The first thing to think about, as I said, is it definitely a book? And then what is your book going to be about? And that's what sort of shapes the size and scope of your book. So you might think, I want to write a book about literacy education, but where does that begin and end? What's the actual shape and scope of that book going to be? It's important to start thinking about, how broad you want it to be, how much comparative study you want there to be, if it's just going to be you or if you're writing with colleagues, and kind of where the book's going to go. And then really important to think about who your book is going to be for. Now, I think this is the most important thing, because lots of people, perhaps because of tenure or because they've been told by, their course leader or something, you should write a book, and they think, I want to write a book on this. But who needs this book? Who's going to read your book, and who will buy it? It's really important for us as publishers that we're going to be able to sell your book. We're not doing it for sort of charity, we're trying to make money. So you need to think about who will buy that book. And in order to write a good book, you need to be thinking about who that person is or who those people are right from the outset. So it may be students, and it may be a textbook. So you're writing something that you think students will read and need. If it's something that you think other researchers will get a lot from, then think about the researchers when you're putting together your book and your book proposal. And then why does the audience need it or want it? And then why will it be better than the competition? If it's not going to be better than the books already published in the public sphere, why would you want to spend your time and energy writing it, and why would we want to publish it? So again, have those hard conversations with yourself about, will your book do something different, and will it be unique in some way, and will it add to the conversation in your field in a way that will be helpful to other researchers or students or professionals in your area. And then the next thing really is to discuss your book idea with as many people as you can get to listen to you. You want to get feedback from colleagues in your department. Who have they published with? What sort of books have they published? Have a look at the books they've published. Ask them about their experiences. Obviously, I'm sure you'll have many people who've published within your departments. I put a couple of people on this slide just from other universities in Malaysia. Obviously, Dr. Chong is going through the process of putting her book together at the moment, her edited book, so she can give you some information. And I will ask her in a little while, just warning you, Dr. Chong, to give us some information about how she's found this process. Speak to authors who've published in your field. Speak to series editors who publish a book series, or if you're lucky enough to meet a commissioning editor like me at a conference, if you get an opportunity to speak to somebody, then do that. Talk to us about your book idea, what you think it's going to be, and I will give you advice and guidance about the shape, about the audience, about the type of book you might be writing. So just going back to this question about who you're writing for, there are a couple of different types of book, and this is important so you can understand who the audience is for those books. So researchers is the most common audience for any academic book. About 80% of the books that Routledge publishes are written as research academic books. And those are generally called monographs or multi-authored monographs or edited collections. Generally, they're around 50,000 words up to about 100,000 words. And they're written for other researchers to further and build on the research that you're doing. We do a short version of that called a Routledge Focus, which is around 25,000 up to about 50,000 words. A Routledge Focus is intended to be focused, a little bit more narrow as a topic, and they're a really good opportunity to publish something if your research is quite current, it's quite topical, but perhaps it's not yet been established enough to be a full-length book, but it will be out of date if you wait too long. So they're sort of short form books, which are again aimed at the research audience. Many of these books will be bought by libraries, and they'll be published in a hardback book and also an ebook. Handbooks are also part of that category. So a handbook is a big reference volume which covers, everything on a particular topic. So it might be, Routledge Handbook of Literacy Education would cover kind of all the different aspects of literacy education from all the different regions, for example. So that just gives you a sense of researchers. If you might be writing for students, potentially you're writing. Oh. I think somebody might have left their microphone on. I can hear a very cute small child chatting. So just pop your microphones off if you can. So students, if you're writing for students, you're potentially writing a recommended reading, a supplementary reading book, which you would use with students on courses, but perhaps isn't specific to a course, or you might be writing a textbook for students. So if in your day-to-day teaching, you think there's a really big gap here for a textbook in my subject, and I would very much like to do a textbook in this particular area, obviously have a look and see what else is out there on the market, and see whether there genuinely is a gap, or you just haven't, found the right textbook. But if you think there's a gap, particularly for the Asian market, there's a lot of textbooks written by Americans or written by British people, Europeans, and actually there's a lot of opportunity for books for Asian students that are a little bit more specific to our contexts. So if you've got a textbook idea, then obviously do propose that, because students do need things that are going to be contextualized for them. So that would be writing for students, and a student book would have box out areas with sort of revisions, or maybe some exercises or activities for them to do. You might be giving summaries at the end of each chapter, those types of features which will help the students to take in that information. And you'd also be writing a textbook in a slightly more relaxed and informal way. You're going to be not using such high level language. So again, thinking about what sort of language and tone you might be taking, how complex the ideas you're putting into the book. Those things can only be worked out if you know who you're writing for. And then the last kind of category is professionals. So if you're writing for teachers, or you might be writing for counsellors or professionals in a field, then you would be writing, again, a very different type of book. And those that audience will need a very different type of information from you. So it's really important that you think about who you're writing your book for. So that just gives you a sense of that. And please do, again, you can ask me questions about types of books or types of audience at the end as well. Okay, so it's not actually this type of proposal, but one of the things that people don't always know is, how do you actually go about putting forward a book to a publisher like Routledge? So it starts with a proposal. It's not the case with Routledge that you have to finish your book and write the entire manuscript and then send it to us. You can do that if you wish, but generally most people, it starts with an idea, and then we ask you to put together a book proposal. And as I say, not this type of proposal, not a marriage proposal, but you do need to be very passionate about the topic, and you do need to be proposing to your editor, your commissioning editor like myself, in a way that will make us want to say yes to your book. You really only have one chance to impress the commissioning editor, to impress the reviewers. So make sure that your proposal is really strong, and as strong as it can be. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about what is inside the proposal questionnaire. This is a very standard format. They vary a little bit from publisher to publisher, but essentially what I'm going to tell you today will be most of the questions that you'll be asked. And it's a physical Word document that we'll send you. They're normally available on our website, or if you speak to a commissioning editor like myself, we can send you a specific one from us. But this is all the information that you will find within the proposal questionnaire. And it's quite straightforward. You just need to answer the questions. Generally, they're around 4 to 6 pages long by the time you've completed them. Try not to make it too long. It looks quite bad from our point of view if you just kind of ramble and waffle on for 18 pages or something. Try and keep it relatively concise if you can. So to start with, we want to know what the title and the subtitle of your book is. This will change as the process goes on, so don't be too worried about what the title is. Essentially, the title needs to include the keywords for your book. So if the book is about literacy education, then include the words literacy education in the title. And there's no point in having a very kind of clever title about, I can't see the wood for the trees or something. If it's actually about literacy and children and teaching, you need to make sure that the things that people are going to search in a Google search or in an Amazon search or a Google Scholar search are going to be the things where your book comes up. So to start with, try not to think about anything fun or exciting with your title, and just put down all the keywords you think someone would search when they're finding your book, and then craft a title which links those things together and you think seems to quite fairly and accurately represent your book. We need to know who is going to be writing the book or who's going to be editing the book, and the order at which they're going to come. We also want to know who you are. So we'll ask you to send us a short CV. So not every journal article you've ever published, or every award you've ever had, but generally, have you published any books before? Have you done journal articles before? And have you done book chapters? Give us a sense of what your institution affiliation is, what your big research funding projects are, but try and keep that CV relatively concise. If there's a few editors, again, give us all that information, and I'll talk about contributors in a little while, but who are you to start with? The rationale is really asking what the need is for this book. So why does this book need to be written? Why do you want to write it? And what is important about it now? So, there may be recent changes in your field that you think need to be reflected. It may be that you've done a big research project, and you're wanting to let people know that this, really exciting research has been done. But essentially, we're asking you, what is the unique selling point of this book? Why should we want to publish your book? So it doesn't have to be very long, but just give us a sense of what makes this book important. And then the synopsis is very much the what. So what is your book about? And again, don't just tell us all the background about your subject. In the first couple of lines of your synopsis, it should be, what is the book going to cover? And then you can explain a bit more of the context behind that. Sometimes I get proposals and they're very, very long, talking about all of the things in the background, and no one's ever written a book in this area, and it's all lots of background and background context. What I want to know is, what are you actually going to do with this book? What is it going to be about? And I want to be able to see from the first page of your proposal what makes this book special and unique. And as you can imagine, as a busy commissioning editor, we get many, many proposals every week. And you want to make sure that your proposal stands out. We want to see the diamond amongst the rough. We want to see the uniqueness. So please make sure you don't bury what's unique about your book in 3 pages of explanation. We also want to know how long your book's going to be. I mentioned earlier on, a general monograph book would be around 50,000 words to 100,000 words. There's no right or wrong answer in that scale, but if you're writing a book which is 300,000 words long, and you're asking us to do a monograph, then maybe we'll have conversations about the appropriate length. So just tell us approximately, and it doesn't have to be that accurate at this stage, how long you think the book is going to be. If it's going to be 100 pages, again, we'll have a conversation about whether it's better as a focus book or if there are things you can do to expand that content. Okay, the next part is something we call the soundbite or the marketing pitch, and that's about selling the book to us in a short sort of 200-word summary. So it's what would form the back cover of your book. If you picked a book up off a shelf in a bookshop, what did they do at the back to sell the book to you? So very briefly, what is your book about and why is it important to the reader, and who is the reader going to be? Catchwords is very much about the keywords for your book. What are the keywords? And then I mentioned earlier that you might want to do an edited volume. So an edited volume is a collection of articles and chapters on a particular topic. So you have an editor or a couple of editors collecting together colleagues in the field and all talking about the same topic, different aspects of that topic. But an edited volume, a good one, needs to bring all of those disparate views, all of those different people's voices together as a collection that has coherency. So a good edited volume will have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it will tell a story. It won't just be lots of kind of random articles, random chapters that don't sort of fit together. So an edited volume needs to be quite well considered and put together. So thinking about who your contributors are going to be. Are they going to be invited, or are you going to just ask for call for papers and then decide which are the most quality options? Is there an international spread of chapters? Why these chapters have been put together? That's something we'll want to know in the proposal. How are you linking those edited volumes together? So that's something to think about, and it's asked for in that particular proposal. Many of you may be thinking about writing a book which is based upon your PhD. You cannot just take your PhD thesis and take the cover off it and put a Routledge cover on and then publish it. What we can do is take some of the content from your thesis and modify it and work with you to make that into a monograph. But there are questions in the proposal about what you will do to change your PhD thesis and how you'll modify and cut it, how you might adapt the language and the style, and if you're going to add any additional information or expand your conclusions. Many PhD theses are very narrow in their focus. And if you think of a monograph as your chance to enter a conversation with other academics in an international sphere, so think about how you can make that content speak to other academics outside of your particular context. Now, it may be that you've written your PhD on a Malaysian context or a Singapore context or a Dutch context or whatever the context might be, but think about how your context compares with or can teach other academics in other fields, in other parts of the world, lessons. What lessons can they learn from your context? How can what you've done be applied in other areas? How can your research add to that conversation? And don't just think about your own research in isolation. So that's really important when you're thinking about making a monograph. And there are other things that you can do about making a PhD thesis speak more broadly to other academics. When you're doing a PhD thesis, you're very much trying to write for your examiners. You're trying to kind of tick all the boxes that the examiners want you to tick so that you can get your PhD. But when you're writing a monograph, everyone knows that you're an academic. They know that you're already a doctor of your subject area. And so you're not having to try and prove anything. What you need to do is show what you did and why it was important and what somebody reading your book will learn and take away from what you've written. So it is a slightly different approach. And again, I can give you some more information. I can send you some guidelines which are much longer about how to change your PhD if you want to do that. Carrying on with the proposal, we'll ask you about the readership, who's going to read your book, and then market, who will buy it. So we're not asking you to tell us numbers, we're not asking you to sort of say, oh, I think, 50,000 people will buy and read my book. But what we are asking is, if it's a textbook, for example, what courses might your textbook be used on? Where might we look for adoptions for your book? If you think it's going to be supplementary reading on courses, what courses are they? And how many students take those courses, so that we've got some leads for when we're looking to sell your book. And it's also for me as a commissioning editor to understand that you really do know who's going to be the market for your book as well. Competition, I mentioned earlier about making sure your book is better than the competition. This is where we ask you to show us that you understand how your book compares to the competition. We'll ask you to put down a list of the books that you're going to that are in your field and why your book is different and why it's potentially better or why it adds to those books rather than being surpassed by those. So that's a really important section of the proposal. Timescale, we're going to ask you to tell us how long you need to write your book. So I'm not going to tell you that you need to send me your book manuscript within 6 months. If you need a year, that's absolutely fine. If you need 18 months, that's absolutely fine. But ideally, no longer than 2 years. Just because 2 years is a very long time and lots of things change in your life and your career within a 2-year period. So generally, most people would be writing a book between 6 months and 2 years. So just give us a sense of when you're thinking of writing. And if you've got a sabbatical coming up and you're going to write during that, then just let us know so that we understand that you're serious about the writing. If it's your first book, we generally will ask you for a sample chapter, and that should be a sample of the book that you're writing, not just an article that you've written or a chapter you've written for another book. Ideally, you would write something which is a draft of one of the chapters of your book that you're proposing. It could be the introduction or it can be a more substantive chapter. The reason we ask that is it gives the reviewers a sense of how you write. If you're a new academic and you maybe haven't been as well published yet, it gives the reviewers a chance to see, you know, what your style is, you know, if they've got any suggestions about the content. You'll get a lot better feedback from the reviewers, a lot more substantial feedback from the reviewers if you give us a sample chapter. So that's you know, something to consider if you can. So that's, in essence, that's the proposal form, and you fill that in and send that back to me in the first instance. And then I will look at your proposal and I will give you feedback. Now, it's very different to journal publishing because I'm working with you, and I will help you make that proposal better. It's not a case of you send it to me and then I'll, you know, it's just a straight reject and it's all gone and there's no chance to do anything else. I would still ask you to make sure that when you send it to me, it's the best version it can be, because we want to make sure it's going to, you know, get to the top of my pile for reading. But I am happy to give you feedback. If you want help with the draft proposal or you want to have a conversation with me before you send the final proposal, then I'm happy to do that. But I'll make an initial assessment. And my assessment will be based on whether I think we can sell your book for you, whether I think that there's a market for it, and what I think about the way that you've written it. So that's, you know, my first initial conversation with you. And we'll maybe have backwards and forwards by email. We might have a conversation, and that may take a few weeks. When we're happy with it, both of us, I'll send it to reviewers. Now, these are academic reviewers in your field. A lot of them will be Routledge authors that I trust and know are going to be kind of supportive, but we'll send the proposal out to a number of reviewers, normally a minimum of 2 to 3, and we'll get their feedback. So they may say, like a journal, they may say accept, minor amendments, major amendments, or reject, after which I'll get those feedback comments and I'll send them back to you for us to discuss again. And if we think there's a chance that you can amend it and make changes, and we'll send it back to the reviewers again. If we think there's no chance to go forward, then we'll talk about what's the possibility for that book going forward. There may be things that we can do. But if the reviewers are very positive and they're very keen on the book, then we'll go forward to the Routledge Publishing Committee, after which we'll offer you a contract, hopefully. That process, the review process, can take around 10 to 12 weeks. At the moment with COVID, it's taking a little bit longer, but that's generally how long it takes. And what are we looking for? So originality, a clearly defined market. So who are you writing your book for? Regional relevance or international appeal. Regional relevance is okay because we're looking at books which might be contextualized for an Asian market, for example. But where possible, if the book is available and interesting to an international market, that's even better. A good author really is a sense of somebody who can write and get feedback and take feedback from the reviewers and from me. It needs to be someone we can work with. Someone who's done strong and rigorous research, and the book proposal needs to have clear language and structure. Essentially, all of those things mean we're looking for a quality project, and we're looking for something we can sell. So that's really what we're looking for. As I said, if we get to the point where the publishing committee at Routledge is happy to offer a contract, then we'll give you a contract to sign. The contract terms are things like your royalty. So we don't charge you any money to publish with Routledge, but we will only publish things we think we can sell. So we will offer you a royalty, a percentage of the sales of all your book copies. So if your book does really well, you'll make a bit of money. If it doesn't do very well, you don't lose any money, but you might not make very much. But still, it's better than you know, any other situation where you're not going to get a little bit of money for it. And we'll ask you for your word count, and we'll ask you for the schedule of delivery when you can send the manuscript. So you'll need to commit at that point. I'm going to just take a pause from you listening to my voice for a second, and I'm going to ask Dr. Chong if she would mind just chipping in and giving us her feedback as somebody who's fairly recently been through this process of getting an edited book contracted. Dr. Chong, can I pass over to you just to give us your views?
Absolutely, Katie. Thank you. So I'll just do a quick sharing from perhaps just my perspective as the book editor. I thought two things. I wanted to share two things. The first is, if any of you are like me, you would have been used to writing articles and writing articles are very different from writing books. So I have had previous opportunity of writing book chapters, but again, that is also very different from writing a whole book. What happened was when I had to understand this, I realized that the book that I had, the idea of the book that I had been there for very long. I've always wanted to write about this idea of literacy education and in Asia, and there isn't enough coverage of Asia, work about this in Asia. So writing a book, I think, doesn't come overnight. It comes from a long-running idea based on long-running research work. So, and that's very different from writing a research article. Yeah, so that's the first thing I wanted to say. So the second thing I wanted to point out was that so again, I had this idea of writing this book, and I got together a group of us, and I put this my own proposal together, and then I went out looking for a publisher. So how do we then, as authors, decide on publishers? I think that the most logical way is just whom have I been reading? Whom have I been reading all this while? Who has been informing my research work? Who has been informing my scholarship all this while? And so, Katie, maybe I didn't say this to you early on, but Routledge has always been my publisher of choice. So I'm very glad that at the end the book that's coming up will be published by Routledge. So because in my own academic work, I read many of the books that I read, I'm informed by publications that come from this particular publisher. So I went and I got in touch with Katie. We met, and I was privileged enough to have to get this chance to speak to her. So when I talked to her about my idea, Katie asked very important questions, and I got to explain it to her, and I think it, to some extent, it managed to influence or at least convince her. And then after that, I had that book proposal, the template that I had then to fill up. So I filled it up. Again, different publishers will have different shapes, so we have to keep our. Sorry, that's the time actually. So so we had to keep our the shape of my book to fit Routledge's requirement. So when I did that and I then passed it on to Katie, then the review process happened. And again, the review process also was a very important part of the shaping of the book. So that helped me see it further as well. So today, as my team and I are wrapping up the manuscript, and we are very excited to put it in very soon, hoping to see it whether the end of this year or early next year. I think I've learned a lot about publishing, especially because publishing a book is completely different from publishing a journal article. And I think if there's any one advice that I would give, is that I think you got to choose your publisher of choice. You got to choose the publisher whom you trust and whom you would like to carry this book for you. Yeah. So yeah, that's my experience. Back to you, Katie.
Thank you, Dr. Chong. I know we're running out of time, so I will just wrap up quite quickly. So submission and publication. What happens after you've submitted your book? Obviously, a couple of years have gone by, or a year and a half have gone by. So this just shows you the book publishing timeline. So the proposal peer review, depending on how long it takes, 2 to 6 months if you have to go back for multiple rounds of revision. The writing, as I say, 3 months to 2 years. Then it takes Routledge about 4 to 6 months to publish your book. We do all the copy editing, we'll do all the typesetting, we'll send you page proofs for you to check, we'll do all the cover designs and everything. So that generally takes about 4 to 6 months. And then at publication, everything that we publish comes out in ebook and hardback, and some books, depending on the book type, will come out in paperback at the same time as well. Very quickly, I just want to sort of a plea really, if you are going to publish your book, or even just journal articles generally, please do make sure that you maximise the impact of your research. I can put this back up again later, and if you've got questions, do ask. But really, this is just some suggestions of things that you can do with networking sites, with social media, with your own department website. You know, don't put all that effort into publishing a journal article, publishing research, and then, you know, just be happy that you've published it and don't tell anybody about it. Please tell everybody that you can tell that you've published a book, and make sure that you're promoting your own research as much as you possibly can. So that's the end of my general presentation. I mentioned that I'm available for one-to-one book discussions by video or voice call tomorrow, or sorry, on the 27th or the 28th of August. My email address is there. Please just send me a direct message saying, I've got an idea for this type of book. Please can we arrange a chat and give me some ideas of when you're available on those 2 days. And I'm really happy to have, you know, 20 minutes, half an hour, quick chat about your project. I'm really happy to give you advice kind of live, even if it's not something that you're desperate to write straight away. If it gives you some chance to think about what book you might write in the future, I'm really happy to do that. So please do that. The other 2 links at the bottom is our author services website for the journals, kind of advice on journals, and our Routledge.com resources for books. And I'm really happy now to spend the next kind of 15 minutes answering any questions you might have about book publishing, but I'm also I've spent 6 or so years in Routledge, Taylor and Francis, working in the journal side, so I can also answer some journal questions if you would like. And I'm just going to share one more thing, if I can find it on my computer. We will circulate this after the presentations to anyone who's registered, but Routledge is offering a 20% discount on this selection of books that we've put together for you as well. So we'll send that round afterwards. So just to let you know to expect that, and I will put the presentation back up just so that you can see, if I can, in case you didn't have a chance to write those down. Okay, fantastic. I'm going to pass on to, I'm going to let Christy let me know if there's any questions. And if you haven't yet, please either put something in the chat box or you can ask a question.
Sure, thanks Katie. Good afternoon everyone, my name is Christy. I'll be helping with the Q&A session. So I think we have one question which has just come in, but in the meantime, if you do, please do type in the chat box. So this question is on the difference between publishing under a book series or just publishing as a general title.
Publishing in a book series versus publishing
as a general title.
Just general, okay.
Yeah.
So
can I interrupt?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sorry, hello Katie, my name is Faye. I raised that question about publishing under general, like a book series, or like publishing it as a general title. Yeah, so perhaps could I elaborate a little bit more on like my question?
Yes, please do.
Yes, thank you so much. Because I have been considering or planning on a monograph for quite a while, but like different advice about whether I should publish it under like a particular book series, which Routledge actually have for my field of studies. And there are also like perhaps disadvantages in publishing the book under a book series. And so I just wonder, like in terms of, for example, like the chances of being accepted, or like, and also after it is published, the reach of the book being under series or like as a general title. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you, Faye. That's a really good question. I didn't put a slide in because I was worried I was going to run out of time within sort of 30 to 40 minutes, but we do have a number of different book series within kind of every subject, but particularly in education, I think we have 157 book series, and in language and literacy, I think there's again another 120 or so. And the best thing to do is have a look at the books that you're reading from a particular publisher and see what series they may be under, because that will give you a steer as to what series might be useful for you. Or you can just look on the publisher's websites. But the advantages of publishing a book under a book series is often you'll get the guidance of a book series editor. And a book series editor is often somebody quite senior who's been around a long time in a particular field, and they will be alongside me. They're my academic advisor essentially. So although I've been in publishing for kind of 18 odd years, I'm not I'm not an expert in academic literacy. I'm not an expert in linguistics, for example, but I have a network of book series editors. I have a network of reviewers who can help me to judge the quality of the actual academic content of a book project. And a series editor will be the first point of call for your proposal when it comes in, and they will judge the quality. They'll also tell us whether they think it's a good fit. And their job is to curate, to sort of, decide what books should go in a particular series, to try and make sure that their particular series is really strong in a particular theme or topic. So it can be great for discoverability. So all the books in that series will have the book series on the front cover, and in the inside it will give you a list of the other titles published in a particular series. So if somebody picks up a book in that series, they will also be able to find your book, which is really helpful. And also you get that name recognition from a particular series editor. People will know that particular person perhaps more than you if you're quite an early career researcher. So those are really positive things. That said, it doesn't have to be published within a book series. If there isn't quite the right series, it can be a mistake to try and kind of, shoehorn a book into a series. And some things can just stand alone. Most monographs will go in a series, and generally we have a number of series which will cover the various topics. But that's something I can advise you on. So don't worry too much about that yourself. If you're not sure, when you send me a message or when we have a conversation, we can talk about what book series might be applicable. I can give you a suggestion of some that we can look at. And then obviously we have to go to the series editor and ask their advice and guidance. And they may not feel that that book is quite right, or they might be able to help you shape the book themselves to make it a better book as well. So I think it is good to publish a book series in a book series, and as I say, come to me, come to your commissioning editor and ask for advice if you're not sure, or look at the books that you know in your field and see where they may be publishing in terms of series, because that can help you pick a publisher as much as anything.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will send you a message and maybe.
Yes, do. I look forward to speaking to you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Are there any other questions? Please type them in the chat box or unmute your line.
Now, don't be shy, because this is a good chance to get a chance to have those questions that you might have always wanted to know about publishing. There are no silly questions. I can give you a couple of things that I didn't include in the presentation, but often come up within these types of sessions. One is about reusing material. So a lot of people will ask me, particularly if they've done a PhD, can I reuse the journal articles that I've already published, or can I, reuse some of the chapter content from other books that I've published in my book, in my monograph? And the answer to that is you can, but you do have to be very transparent about what you're reusing. It's not like journal publishing, where with a journal article, you shouldn't really reuse any material. It should be completely new and fresh. With a book, it's recognised that it would be very difficult to write 80,000 words without having, built on previous research. But as long as you're very clear in your review, in your proposal, what content you're going to be reusing and how much you're going to be reusing, then I think that's fine. We wouldn't generally publish something which is mostly reused. Generally, we try and aim for no more than about 20% of the content having been completely reused from somewhere else. And we would also advise that you scatter that content through the book rather than just republishing whole chapters from other places, mainly because the main point of academia is that you're trying to build your reputation and build your brand and build your career up as an academic. If you are seen to be one of those people who just regurgitate the same material all the time, it can damage your brand, your reputation as an academic. And you want someone who picks up your book, who has previously read your journal articles and followed you perhaps on ResearchGate or one of the networking sites, to think, wow, this is really interesting. I'm so happy that this particular person has given that information. So, think about whether you're being kind of true to yourself in what you're offering, and don't just reuse too much material, because the reviewers won't take too kindly to it as much as anything. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Katie, there's another one regarding priorities of topics and subjects. So the attendee is asking, because by knowing these priorities, the the writers can narrow down their focus in terms of content or subject matter?
Do we have any priorities?
Yes, in terms of topics.
That's a difficult one. I mean, obviously, I mentioned at the beginning, Routledge is a huge publisher. We publish, 5,000 odd books a year, and we do cover pretty much any topic you can imagine. And in the monographs area, these tend to be quite focused, quite narrow topics, and that's okay. So there isn't necessarily a kind of a specific thing that we're looking at. And the best thing, if you've got 2 or 3 ideas for a book, or you're working in a kind of varied area of research, would be to have a conversation with me about what you're thinking, and I can give you quick feedback on, if you've got 2 or 3 ideas, I can say, okay, we've done this to death. This is, we've loads of books on this area, or this is something that sounds really interesting, or this is a new take on an area that I'm aware of. So that's probably the best approach, is just to have either send me an email or we can have a conversation. I'm happy to do that. But essentially, it's got to be something you're really passionate about, and you think there's a need for that book out there in the market, in the field, because nobody's writing about that particular thing, or you've done this research and you think people need to know about it. There's no point me telling you what to write, because the chances are I'm going to be telling you to write something which doesn't really fit with the field of research that you're in, or the work that you've done. The only exception to that might be an edited volume. Sometimes people want to write an edited volume on a particular area, and they have some content, but they want to, gather together colleagues in other parts of the world, in other universities, to all together on the same topic, and that's possible to do. But as Dr. Chong, I'm sure, will attest to, it's not the easiest thing in the world, because trying to work with lots and lots of other academics who've all got their own timetables and their own deadlines and other things they're writing can be quite challenging, and trying to make an edited volume feel like one book rather than just lots of different things all being kind of smushed together can be quite difficult. So I think, to answer your question, that I think possibly the best thing to do is just to send me an email with what you're thinking, with the 2 or 3 ideas that you've got, and I can give you some kind of quick feedback, and perhaps we can have a sort of longer conversation about that. Okay.
Okay, great. No more questions at the moment. I think we'll just wait for a while.
Okay, no problem. So I think I've put the presentation back up, so hopefully you can see my email address and the information on there. All I would say as a sort of final point on this would be, I know it can be incredibly intimidating if you've never written a book before, and my job is really to work and hold the hands of the authors that I work with, and I'm really keen for more books, particularly from authors in Asia. I was talking to Dr. Chong about the lack of authors we have from Malaysia in particular, because I don't understand quite why we don't get as many authors from Malaysia as we should from other places, because Malaysian authors that I've met all speak and write fantastic English. They're doing excellent, really high quality international research, but for some reason often end up publishing in local language and not publishing in English, or not going for a large publisher like ourselves. Because we're only asking for a proposal form, I don't see that there's anything to lose with trying with a large publisher like Routledge. Yes, we're a good quality academic publisher, but I can give you advice and suggestions on how to make your project better, and make it more likely to be accepted. Others have done it. I'm not as intimidating as all that. And please do just think about having a try at putting a proposal in. It takes a couple of months to get a response, and worst case scenario, you don't get through, it's a rejection. You can still go back and publish in the kind of local publisher route. But if you succeed, then your book is going to have much wider visibility and much wider coverage with a large publisher like Routledge on the kind of international scene. So that's my kind of plea for you all, is to please do think about giving it a go. And I hope to hear from some of you following this presentation. And thank you very much for listening. I know it's not so easy to listen to a webinar as it is to do it face-to-face, and I hope to see many of you in person as soon as COVID-19 allows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. So I don't know. I suppose at the moment we're not getting any more questions come through. Yeah. Right. Again, I think that was very eye-opening, even for me, yeah, to hear the process and to and for me to sort of match my own experience with the process that you kind of stated, yeah. So I also, together with Katie, would say to all who are here, you know, give it a shot, think about it, and in any case, Katie again has been very kind to allow you know, appointments to be made later over the internet so that you can talk to her further and explore your ideas with her as I did, yeah, about a year and a half ago. So so perhaps we'll just round up this session, and what I'll tell audience is that we'll kind of round off now at 1 p.m. But this platform will continue to run. We're not gonna shut off the platform. I will of course run a video on the loop as I am expected to do so. So don't worry about that. And then we will come back at 2 p.m. To have the part 2 continue, yeah. And also, can I also say to authors who are in here for part 2, do come on quick, just about say 15 minutes before, so that we can kind of quickly test all our microphones and our videos. So I shall then finish off this session. Katie, peace. Christy Kennedy, thank you so much. I will be getting back in touch with the both of you in due course. But again, thank you very much for your time and for your contribution to this session.
No problem, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Chong. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So everyone have a good lunch. We'll see you in an hour's time.
UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP, wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now. UTP. Wow! UTP is the best choice for the endless opportunities it offers. I choose UTP. Join me now.
Hello again. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Can I just quickly have
Hi.
Hi. Hi. Hang on. Because I hear an echo for myself. Right.
Hi, Jenny. Long time no see.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Everybody's microphone is fine.
Okay.
Yes. Want to try your mics?
Testing.
Okay, hi Moklis. Sorry,
Hi,
I
Jenny.
was on mute.
Hi, Suli. Do you still have an echo?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello everyone. I can hear you,
Good
Sumati. Hi,
Okay.
Jiawei.
Hi, Shelby.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Xiaobei. Hi,
Hi.
Zeti.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Suli. I have one question, a very short question. So I have to use my cell phone for Microsoft Teams because it doesn't work on my two laptops. But the issue is that I can't share my slides through the cell phone. So could you please share them for me when I'm doing the presentation?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Sumi, to me you sound very echoey and not very clear.
Oh my God, not again.
Hi, Grace.
Sophie, we have to catch up soon, okay?
Yeah, long time no see, a very long time.
Very long time, my gosh. Do you have headphones, Sumati? Will that help if you put on headphones?
I don't have that problem with any of my students. Still echoing?
Yeah. Yes.
Can I check my microphone? Am I echoey?
No, yours is fine.
No, you're
You're
good.
fine, Suli.
Yeah, yours is fine. How about
Alright.
mine? Not echoey? It's good?
Yours okay, Zeti?
No, you're
problem.
good, Zeti.
Great, thank you.
So can I check again? Just now it was because when we were all speaking for the bit, was it Xiaofei? Was it you who said that you have slides? You can't sort of show your slides.
Yes, I can't show my slides.
Okay, right. Sure.
Okay, is this echoing?
Better.
Better.
Is it too soft?
It's okay. I think if we can increase the sound on our side.
Okay.
Okay. All right. If that's the case, we'll give everyone else say about 7 to 10 minutes more. Yeah, and we can perhaps shut off our microphones and our videos. We'll see you in a bit.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, I have to say this. Gabriel, hi! Hello, Gabriel.
Hello, hi, nice to see you.
Hi,
It's
Gabriel.
been so long. It's so great to see you.
Hi, Gabriel.
To both of you, yeah. Hi there. Hi, how are you?
I'm
How's it going?
It's been going good. So we've had
Good.
part 1 finished, and So we're excited to speak about part 2.
Lovely. Looking forward to it.
Okay, so
It's
I'll switch off
very,
my-
it's
Yes.
very cold here. Wet, raining, windy.
Oh.
But isn't it still, well, no, it's summer's ending. No.
Early
Yeah,
autumn?
No, this is summer. Just very cold.
Sorry, I mean, for the others who are wondering, I mean, I think we're having a little conversation, but that's actually Gabrielle is Grace's and my supervisor in Cambridge. That's why we're going.
I couldn't resist when I saw Gabriel on screen. I was like, hi.
Okay, I'll stop now.
Sorry.
Right, we'll see you in a bit, Gabrielle.
Yep.
Gabrielle,
Yeah.
I think you may have shared your screen.
It's 14 hours.
Sorry, say again. Oh, yes.
I think you may have shared your screen, so you want to sort of unshare the screen.
Yeah, I haven't used this before, so yeah, okay, got it. Yep, done. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
And your video as well, Gabrielle.
Oh yeah, okay, hang on.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Yep. Great. Right. Just let me share my screen so that we can begin, yeah? Yep. Can I just get a bit of feedback? Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Right. So it's just a little after 2 p.m. in Malaysia. So let's come back. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening again, everyone. For those of you who've just joined us, I am Li CHONG, or Li CHONG in the Western Convention, that is my name. Chong Li in the Eastern Convention, that is my name. And I'm from University Technology Petronas. And I will be moderating and hosting this session from University Technology Petronas. So I'm actually dialing in from my office, yeah? So for those of you who stayed back from previously, from just now, thank you for coming back. Again, I hope that part 1 has been useful for you, yeah, where Katie and Christy spoke about publishing with Routledge. So we'll move into part 2 of the literacy webinar. And part 2 of the literacy webinar is actually it's part of an upcoming book. Yeah, it's part of an upcoming book where there will be 11 of us as speakers from this book. So there are 11 of us from 7 countries here. The countries are Brunei, China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Taiwan. So all 11 of us are chapter authors in this upcoming edited book to be published by Routledge. It's entitled Charting an Asian Trajectory for Literacy Education, Connecting Past, Present, and Future Literacies. Just to note, there are actually 12 chapters in this book, and therefore 12 authors. But one of us, Professor Lalaine Yanila Aquino from University of Philippines, is unfortunately unable to be with us today. So you will just hear from 11 of us, right? So each of us will be given 10 minutes to highlight our chapters so as to share our research on literacy education within the region in which we live. As I'm the editor of the book and as I conceive the book, it will make sense for me to start. So in my session, I want to do 2 things. I'd like to set the stage for why Asia. And then in the second point, I'd like to provide a framework that underpins the book. Yeah. So let's begin with the first aim. Yeah. Why Asia, and how are we doing in terms of literacy? Okay. Let's move to the next slide. All right. So I thought the best place to start this conversation is to look at this universally accepted marker of literacy in the global context. Now, every year, the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, releases their Human Development Indices and indicators that provides global measures for health, education, quality of life, gender parity or disparity. So if we were to take a look at literacy rates in these 7 countries that's covered in our book, as seen here reported in the 2018 Human Development Indices and Indicators document, you will see on the slide, you will notice 2 things. Number 1, the data is incomplete. Hong Kong doesn't seem to have data from the years 2016 to 2018. To be fair, there were many other OECD countries that also didn't have data for that particular report. And Taiwan, unfortunately, completely does not exist in the report. Yeah. Number two, for those countries that are represented, so you see Brunei, China, Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines, it appears that we are doing quite well. So our literacy rates range between 93 to 97%, which just means 9 to 10 out of 10 people in the country are considered functionally literate. And functional literacy means the ability to read and write meaningfully in a few sentences for everyday use. That's the meaning of literacy. That's the definition of adult literacy. Yeah. So all well and good. But in the very same report, a recurring issue is about inequality. So findings from the report show that not only is there a widening gap between rich and the poor in every country, and this means that the socioeconomic factor cuts through other domains like education, healthcare, and quality of life, the gap between the rich in rich countries and the rich in poorer countries is also getting bigger. So this issue of inequality and now nationality can affect life chances. Crucially, also, the report states that a large portion of the world's poorest communities live in Asia. So one of the means with which the inequality gap can be closed is through universal literacy and universal education. Again, well and good. But my experience tells me that in Asia, the definition and lived experience of being literate is differently complex. There are multiple reasons for this, but here I will highlight one. Yeah, Asia is culturally and linguistically diverse, and because much of Asia was colonized, we also inherit and embrace languages that are foreign to the indigenous land. So it's common for an Asian child to grow up learning how to decode across multiple writing systems. Speaking as a Malaysian, I lived the experience of learning my school and university subjects in the Malay language. Malay is my national language. But I also lived the experience of navigating the English language that existed in school and at home. And then I was expected to learn Mandarin, a language associated with my culture and my heritage. So take a moment to imagine what that is like for a child. In large part, we understood that we just needed to learn how to read across different semiotic systems. But one of the side effects of this circumstance, I think, is the way literacy is seen as largely functional. So very often you see schools are pressured into showing up numbers of literate children, but narrowly defined by those who can sound out words. It's important for me to point out that in the Malay language, the word illiterate is translated as buta huruf, which back translates into letter blind, whilst literate is translated as jelek huruf, which back translates into letter sighted. So by this, it is assumed that as long as a child is letter sighted, they are literate. My research team and I are in the midst of putting our fieldwork findings together that show a significant number of children who can decode, but who cannot make meaning from what they decode. Therefore, are they really literate? Yeah, and is this definition of reading far too narrow? In many parts of the Western world, notions of literacy have long been broadened. So groundbreaking work from new literacy studies argue that reading is not just a decoding ability, but a sociocultural practice. Simply put, whether a child can meaningfully read or not can more than likely be predicted by their socioeconomic, sociocultural, and even national standing. While this concept is powerful, I'm also aware that it will not fit fully with Asia's ways. Our histories have been shaped by too much strife and instability, poverty, and injustice, that literacy must first be functional. But I also argue that we can allow room to see reading as a sociocultural practice. So this brings me to my next point, which is the framework underpinning this book. Yeah. Now, in another edited book project that Grace and I were fortunate enough to be a part of, with Evelyn Arizpe and Gabrielle Cliff Hodges as editors. You'll see the picture of our book there. Yeah, and again, Gabrielle was earlier on. We talked to her just before this. The book entitled Young People Reading, also published by Routledge. This was in 2018. Across the book, we managed to show that reading experience in different contexts, in different continents, from east to west, was actually unique to the reader. So their motivations to read, the reasons for reading or not reading, how to read, what to read, were very difficult to predict. This means that each person's trajectory is important to shape their literacy journey. So this idea of individual trajectories became an important theme for me to consider in the current book. So the framework for the current book, Charting an Asian Trajectory, is premised upon the individual trajectory and biographical voice of each author. Today, that you will listen to the authors may or may not touch on this in their individual presentations, but in the book you will see us weave our biographic and historical stances with our empirical research work to better theorize the complexities that shape the journey of readers in the Asian context. So this collection of work hopefully provides enough compelling evidence and lived experience of being literate in Asia. Hopefully for us to see reading as being more than decoding and that it is meaning making. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have been able to set the stage for the rest of my colleagues to present their work. We hope to be able to bring you on a literacy journey across Asia as we share our trajectories. As we go along, I request that the participants please keep your microphones and video cameras turned off during the presentations, but please feel free to type your questions or comments into the chat box. Yeah, we will allocate between 5 to 10 minutes after 6 speakers so that we can address the questions. And of course, during the Q&A sessions, you are most welcome to turn on the microphone to speak with us. So without delay, let me pass the floor to our next speaker, Associate Professor Dr. Mukhlis Abu Bakar from National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Dr. Mukhlis, over to you.
Thank you, Suli. Hi, can you see my slide?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Mukhlis. I'm a teacher educator at the National Institute of Education of the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. So thank you to Suli for inviting me to contribute a chapter to the book, and also for inviting me to talk a little bit about my chapter in this webinar. I thought I'll begin by showing you this Facebook post of mine that I posted a couple of months ago. I'll read it with you and then I'll talk about it a little later. I was thrown a fairly decent float to help me swim from one side of the channel to the other. Some others were not as fortunate. They were given floats with little holes in them, which they patched with their loose ends of their clothing. Others had to cling on to thin wooden planks, yet others had no means to help them swim, other than sheer grit and physical strength. I wondered what the scenery of the channel would be like had I sat on a canoe, if only I had one. Others on a motorized boat would not only have enjoyed the scenery, but delighted at the chance to ride the waves that came their way. But what is a delight to some might be a dismay to others, especially those who were struggling to keep afloat. On reaching the shores, those with their clothes dry had time to pick the most delicious coconuts from the swaying trees that lined the beach before moving on to dreamland on chauffeur-driven cars. Others who landed later had to recover from their ordeal. Enjoying the soft flesh of the coconut was furthest from their minds, not that they don't need them, perhaps more so. I was fairly exhausted, but with enough reserved energy to pick what's left of the coconuts. I made my way to dreamland, but not without much haggling over the taxi fare. Those left on the beach either decided to make that their dreamland or harbored hopes of getting to dreamland one day if they could hitch a ride from a passing car. This post is not part of the chapter in the book, but it presents the same perspective as the chapter, as far as how it views a person's life trajectory. The story is metaphorical, swimming from one side of the channel to the other in order to reach dreamland. It's like a race called life. And in this race, some are given a big head start, such as a motorboat, while others are not, relying on just their strength. So some have a better opportunity to win the race as a result of that, but that is not due to anything that they've done. It had nothing to do with decisions they've made. They were just born in that socio-cultural milieu. If it had been a fair race, where everyone is given the same kind of float and transport, the race to dreamland could have had a different winner. So similarly, in the context of literacy, a child could be born in a family where reading and writing are exactly how it would take place in the school. So for them, schooling is perhaps just a continuation of what happens at home, of course, with some minor adjustments. But for some others, the purposes and meanings that are attached to literacy in their family may conflict with those they experience in school. And this may in turn affect their participation in classroom language activities, their classroom experience, and also their educational achievement. Ever since I worked with children and their families more than a decade ago, where I documented their lived literacy experience in and out of school, it often made me wonder if I could have ended up being different had I been in their place, if I had grown up in an entirely different family, of a different social class, with different role models, with different ways of learning literacy, with different beliefs about what counts as reading, or what being a good student means, and what different opportunities were afforded to me. So studying these children made me reflect on my own trajectory. Now, all the 8 children were from intact families. As far as I'm concerned, they were of regular intelligence. Their parents had high hopes for them. These children were 5 to 7 years old then. However, how literacy was transmitted to the children differed between the families. The literacy practices of the higher socioeconomic class matching more closely with that of the school. So the cultural capital that they bring to school did not all have the same value. Some are more valuable than others. And this placed the children on a different starting point in school. So in this chapter, I focus on 2 of the 8 children, in particular, Adam and Naila, both are pseudonyms. These children, both are from middle-class families. Their parents are all graduates, and they are mostly English-speaking. Both children were exposed to meaning-based literacy instruction at home, and not just simply decoding of words. And this happens as they engage in discourse around text with adults, their mothers in particular. So even though they are from the same social class, there is a subtle difference between their experiences. For one, Adam's exposure to text is wide-ranging and not limited to stories, but also including expository books. And Adam is also used to a one-to-one extended discourse with adults, where reading is more exploratory, a time for clarification and experimentation with ideas, which reflects a more divergent kind of learning. Naila's experience, on the other hand, is more focused. On the other hand, it's more focused on storybooks and school-related materials, such as worksheets. Her mother, being a former teacher, helped to situate Naila within a more convergent modes of learning. In the chapter, I showed how their different learning exposure put them on a different footing in school, Naila being the one more prepared to negotiate school literacy. Right. I was fortunate to have been able to keep in contact with both of them after all these years. At the end of the study, Adam and Nyla were 7 years old, and then I met them again when they were just about to turn 20, at which time they agreed to be interviewed to share with me their schooling experiences. So as I've said earlier, Adam and Nyla grew up in middle-class homes, but with different cultural capital, some more valuable than others. And this had impacted on their literacy trajectory. While Nyla progressed almost seamlessly from primary school to university, save for some hiccups at secondary school, Adam's trajectory was less stable as he had difficulty activating his cultural capital during much of his school years. But both had limited agency in shaping their trajectory, the school being the more dominant institution. To add another layer of meaning to the relationship between cultural capital and school outcome, and between structure and agency, I also included in the chapter an account of my own literacy trajectory and autobiography spanning some 25 years from primary school to the completion of my doctoral studies. I made a comparison between the experiences of Adam and Nyla and mine, how the different contexts, whether it's political, social, educational, bear upon our respective trajectories. Firstly, Adam and Nyla's literacy trajectories and mine was set during different stages of Singapore's development. While mine began in the 1960s during the nascent period of nation building, where parents were generally less involved in the schooling process and placed less academic pressure on the young, theirs took off in the 21st century, where the Singapore society has grown competitive, pushing parents to take a more active role in their children's literacy development. Secondly, I did not have the advantages of text-based literacy learning at home. My parents were not as highly educated. My mother did not speak English. So I first acquired literacy when I attended kindergarten. What I think played a more significant role in my literacy trajectory are the traditional Asian values of obedience, propriety, and industry, and resilience, if I may add, that I acquired at home. I would not think that at this present time, such capital would be sufficient, though important, to ensure that children are able to negotiate school literacy successfully. Finally, would I be, a question that I pose to myself, would I be more successful than I already am if I had the same home literacy advantages that Adam and Nyla had? Similarly, would they be as successful if they only had what I had? But I won't answer the question, so obviously there's not enough time, but you might find them in the chapter. So get a copy of the book once it's out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muklis. I forgot to mention earlier on that we are actually trying to keep time as well. So audience and of course speakers, you will hear this bell. Let me just try it out. Yeah, so that means the speaker, you have about a minute to sort of tie up your presentation. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I think the bell didn't quite go properly just now, but you kept to time. Not too bad, not too bad.
Right.
Because again, we're trying to fit everybody in.
Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Muklis.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can unshare your screen. Yeah. Right. So we call on Assistant Professor Dr. Sumadi Ranganathan from University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia. Dr. Sumadi, over to you.
Okay, let me share my slide. Can you see me?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it's coming through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you see?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you so much to Dr. Chong Soo Lee for organizing this webinar. Now, the title of my chapter in this book is Where Literacy Practices Collide. And basically, I explore the relationship between home, school language and literacy practices of minority indigenous children. And I am Sumati Ringanathan, and I am attached to the Department of Language and Linguistics, Utah, University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Kampar campus, Malaysia. Now, the focus in this chapter is I look at home practices, literacy practices and language practices, and then also look at the relationship, how it supports or it differs with the language and literacy practices in school. And I basically look at a specific minority indigenous children. And I explore this using a cultural lens, okay? And the minority indigenous children that I explore in this chapter basically are the Semai Orang Asli. Because in Malaysia, we have many indigenous groups, and they are all termed under this umbrella term called Orang Asli, especially in Peninsular Malaysia, and Semai is one group. And the Orang Asli themselves, okay, they are less than 0.6% of the total population in Malaysia. And I look specifically from the cultural lens because I believe that when we talk about indigenous community, we are mostly attracted to their way of life, their culture, their songs, you know, musical instruments, their attire. So because of their rich culture, most of the time, like in Malaysia, because we are a multicultural society, we sort of, you know, showcase how rich indigenous cultures are. However, when we look at educational issues, okay, that is where culture takes a different perspective. Because when we deal with educational issues, then most of the indigenous issues that we always explore are, you know, how marginalized and disadvantaged this community is positioned in the Malaysian context, especially, and how, you know, they belong to this minority ethnic and language community. So most of the time when we deal with educational issues especially, then the culture is looked at from a role that sort of doesn't support education. So in the chapter that I wrote for this book, I look at this relationship. And what I basically did was I looked at it from a drawing on cultural discontinuity theories and see how home culture, okay, where the children, because they come from a community that's disadvantaged and marginalized, and they have their own language, which is usually not the language that is used in school. So how cultural discontinuity theories can help me understand this relationship. And cultural discontinuity theories themselves, okay, they are divided into two main groups. One looks at micro level, and these are micro-ethnographic research that looks at daily practices of this community. So they look at how children use language in their homes, within their community, or in school, what are the literacy and language practices that these children are involved in. And then the other theory is what I draw a macro level. And these theories look at population level. So basically, this theory look at culture and language differences at population level, where they compare minority population with mainstream majority communities, or within or among minority communities themselves, because like in Malaysia, we also have other minority communities. Like for example, myself, I'm a Malaysian Indian, but I am a minority because the total population of Indians in Malaysia is less than 7%. So these are the main theories that I draw, okay, to help understand these, difficulties when we try to address educational outcomes of indigenous children. Because in Malaysia, they are among, they have a very, I think they are, they have the highest dropout rate, and they are always categorized as the least educated in Malaysia. Now, when I looked at this cultural discontinuities among the Semai orang asli, I also looked at, how the current education policy that Malaysia has, and some of the good intervention programs that they have introduced, how it supports a home culture and home language of these children when they do come to school. And research that have looked, and there are quite a number of research. In fact, some of the research that I've done, I also looked at, detailed literacy practices of home and school, and what kind of community culture and support that these children have, and school expectation, because if culture and language is very different at home, then the expectations of school, where you have exams and teachers who come from a different community or different ethnic group, how is this supported? So I explore all this in my chapter, and also weaving my own biographical stance related to my own literacy trajectory, coming from underprivileged minority background, because growing up in a poor neighborhood with very limited literacy resources and practices at home, parents' level of education that usually doesn't support children, similar like the kind of children that I work with. And in addition, also in this chapter, I explore how, within this disadvantaged context, how some children do succeed. Very, very few groups of children, despite coming up with this limited literacy background or different language compared to the language that is used in school, how do they manage to succeed? And to do this, what I did was I draw back on my longitudinal qualitative cohort study, where it started in 2008, where I had a group of students in year 6. There were 11 of them, okay, and they were 12 years old then, and I followed them till now in 2020. They are in their 20s, okay. And I basically explored their literacy trajectory and schooling trajectory to see who finished school, okay? So these are the things that is addressed in the chapter. So if you want to know, among these 11 students who made it, okay, please read my chapter in the book. With that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumati. Thanks. Right, we shall move on to the next speaker. Can I call upon Assistant Professor Dr. Malay Zeti from University Technology Brunei in Brunei. Zeti, please.
Okay. Hi everyone. Can you see me or not yet?
Not yet. Dr. Somebody, could you unshare your screen? Dr. Somebody, could you unshare your screen, please? All right.
Okay. Can you all see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay, first of all, thank you very much to everyone who is attending this session. My name is Dr. Malaizati Sheikh Abdul Hamid. I'm currently an assistant professor at University Technology Brunei, UTP, which is also the only national technological university in Brunei. Okay, so my book chapter actually touches on these things. Okay, firstly, I touch on a brief background on Brunei Darussalam, in which I talk about the education system in Brunei, and then I move on to talk about a little bit on my biological stance in this chapter, and then I move on to talk about literacy progress in Brunei, and of course on to a little bit on my research findings. And lastly, I wrap up with my thoughts about literacy and the trajectories that affected Brunei. Okay, just to start with, Brunei. Currently, Brunei, in terms of ranking, we are not too far away from us and other ASEAN countries. Normally, you're usually after Singapore, Malaysia, probably even Indonesia, and Brunei comes in fourth. That's something that has always been around the block. For Brunei, there are 4 priority areas in education for ministry. Mostly, one will be about the quality of school leaders, and then the quality of teaching and learning for the 21st century, and then implementing something like a school-home link between parents and school. And lastly, the 4th priority is to enhance students' literacy and numeracy skills in Brunei. So those are the 4 main priority areas in education for Brunei Darussalam. For those who are not familiar with Brunei, Brunei has a very small population, so only about 400,000 people, and the population are composed mostly of Malays. About 65.7% are Malays, Chinese are about 10.3%, and other minorities 24%. Officially, Brunei uses Bahasa Melayu, or the Malay standard language, as the official language in Brunei. But English is just more of a second language, or is the second language in the country. Therefore, that was the reason why back in 1984, we have a bilingual policy implemented in Brunei. And the policy has been around since then, until to a time where the ministry decides that in order to fit in with the expectations of the current 21st century, Brunei needs to change the current policy and to make it more equipped or relevant to the current stage it is. So what happened was in 2019, Brunei decides to restructure its education system to a new policy, or newly revised system rather, which is known as the National Education System for the 21st century, known as the Sistem Pendidikan Negara Melayu Abad 21, or sometimes referred to SPN 21. Now, the point of doing this is actually to make plans for introducing literacy into its education system, which previously was not very obvious. However, the one interesting thing that I have to share with Brunei, in comparison to a lot of countries around the world, that we're a very cultural country, I would say, because Brunei believes that whatever that we do here, we have to follow by a social and cultural structure of the people of the country, in which that there's a lot of emphasis on 3 important elements: being Malay, Islam, and Islam the main faith, the monarch, and that's B, Malay Islam monarchy. So armed with these core values, Brunei has maintained its sovereignty and peace by closely following to this. So in my chapter, I emphasize a lot of this component of culture chapter, because it's so important that in order to understand what goes on in literacy in Brunei, you also need to understand where we come from. In Brunei, in terms of literacy progress, interestingly, when the previous system doesn't allow for any literacy involvement or literacy content, it was only in the new system, SPN 21, that Brunei was able, or the Ministry of Education was able to implement a strategic plan on quality education. And this includes the inclusion of critical skills such as mathematics, science, language, and ICT. And that pupils are more now offered the opportunities to participate in classroom-based activities and to have discussions in teaching pedagogy that focuses on student-centered learning. Again, this was different from what happened in the previous system back in 1985. So that was one of the things that we really welcome with the literacy education in Brunei. Now, back to supporting the new policy is the inclusion of the national philosophy I mentioned, called the Malay Islamic Monarchy. Now, this concept of philosophy of MIB, which we call it here, actually it's something that's been used for some time now, but more recently now we've started to see that MIB is so important because it holds the reign of how literacy education is being taught and learned by students in Brunei. If I may clarify, in Brunei, this new arising trend now that literacy must talk about cultural literacy, which in my book I define as acquiring knowledge of acceptable norms, traditions, and cultural practices, which identifies one to belonging to a particular culture. So some examples of cultural literacy would be maybe perhaps possessing knowledge of weddings, traditional games or dances, local food. So these are the things that are quite important and significant for our country here, Brunei Darussalam. And in Brunei, the Brunei students are expected to have accumulated large amounts of cultural literacy and knowledge about the way of life of Brunei that happens in Brunei throughout their educational journey. And again, this is further enhanced with MIB, or the Malay Islamic Monarchy, as a national philosophy. If I were to return to my research, from my research in Brunei primary schools, in my book chapter, I touch on, well, the thing is, Brunei is not many literature has been, or research has been conducted in Brunei, not because we're not interested, but there were very little scope to focus on literacy as previously noted. But more recently now, one of my main research has been quite significant because it helps allow Brunei to see where we are in terms of literacy. In Brunei, I would say that generally, Brunei are not the Brunei students are not so much engaged in sufficient literacy practices for effective acquisition of English. Now, because English is used as a second language, whenever we refer to literacy in Brunei, it always means English literacy, not literacy in Malay. Because Malay is something that they're quite okay. It's just literacy in English is what is quite a difficult task in Brunei, despite it being a second language practice in Brunei. On that note, every time we mention reading or literacy in Brunei, it is always equated to reading. So in Brunei, if you mention literacy, oh, you mean reading skills. And that's how it's been perceived all this time in Brunei. So that was one of the hardest tasks that I had to unravel to start with whenever I started my research. In my current research in primary schools, as I focus mostly on schools in Brunei and particularly in primary schools, I found that, for example, children in Brunei, especially the girls, they are very, very focused on, very positive towards literacy or reading, but not so much in the boys, surprisingly. And reading comprehension among primary students are also quite challenging. Sometimes they can read, but the thing is, I feel that sometimes they're not necessarily able to understand what you read. So in that context, I believe that the children in Brunei also are probably doing the same thing in Malaysia. They're reading without understanding. The word recognition is slow, and they're not making sense of what you read. So they could be doing parrot reading, and that's the one thing that I've noticed throughout my study. In terms of support, Bruneians parents are very supportive in terms of buying books, but they themselves are not reading to the children, for example, because not only English is not used as the main language, it's also not commonly found. People don't speak into English, they speak mostly in Malay. So these are the things that I have touched on in my work in this book chapter. Just to go back to the current state of literacy in Brunei, I would say that for us, literacy actually matters because there are cultural benefits to literacy in Brunei. Because here we are able to question attitudes and norms and the national philosophy as of course the main stakeholder. When we're able to improve the ability to engage with one's culture. So this is for me why literacy would matter. Of course, the other hand is that we talk about better knowledge of healthcare, family planning, family cohesiveness as another social benefit of why literacy matters for us here as well. And of course, economic benefits. So for example, there will be return on investment in literacy programs by government, both government and non-governmental organizations to support literacy. So in this book, I also touch on the framework, the most recent framework being a mastery towards literacy and numeracy, which has recently also happened quite recently in Brunei, back in 2017. So that was also something that I also touch in my book. I think in near conclusion in my chapter in my book, I actually would like to emphasize that the previous bilingual education policy in Brunei and the new 21 SPN21 system actually maintained the goal of Brunei's bilingual policy. And earlier on, although most of the teaching occurs in Malay, there's now a switch to moving everything to English. And taking that perspective, that literacy is viewed as a social cultural practice, the language and everyday experiences of the Brunei children, the thing is, are largely done in Malay, specifically the localized language, which is Brunei Malay. And so far, the cultural literacy studies in Brunei have revealed that Brunei children have very limited time of contact with English at home and even at school. So children generally struggle with English, despite it being a bilingual education policy. And I also observed that children's spoken and home literacy experiences, of course, are very crucial in playing an important role in building their confidence in using English language. So in conclusion, my chapter, in my part is that I have described the background to English Brunei's education system. And I've also shown that despite despite improvements, there has not been much progress in the teaching of English literacy. And that the dominance of the Malay language is indicated there are both internal, external, and cultural factors that must be considered prior to improving language acquisition and raising standards of literacy in Brunei. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zeti. Thanks. So we'll move on to the next speaker. Before we do that, can I please remind everyone to turn off their microphones? Thank you. Right, we'll move to the next speaker. The next speaker is Associate Professor Dr. Chin Ee Loh from the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Over to you, Chin Ee. Zeti, could you turn off your camera, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. Can you see my slides? Okay, hang on. Can you see my slides?
Yeah,
no.
Got it. Got it.
You got it? You can see the slides, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone and thank you, Suli, for inviting me to the presentation. Here's another one from Singapore, and I talked about my lived experiences of literacy learning in Singapore from past to present, and I hope to use this to think about what I hope for the future as an educator. It's an autoethnographic study, meaning I look at my own family histories of learning to read. So to frame this particular chapter, I talk about the idea of reading as cultural capital. Mukhlis mentioned that in his presentation, so I guess I'm writing on his presentation to talk a little bit more about it. In terms of cultural capital, I like to break it down into three different kinds. Bourdieu talks about embodied cultural capital. That's what you are. So for example, your enjoyment of reading, your development of a reading habit, that is embodied cultural capital. There's objectified cultural capital, things that we own, such as books that we may have, library cards, even books, pens, and papers for writing, and these are objectified cultural capital. There's institutionalized cultural capital, which are the educational qualifications that one may obtain as a result of maybe having studied or gone past a certain stage in terms of their educational journey. And here I look at cultural. Yes, sorry, Suli, can you see it?
For some reason, your slide, I think, is not has not been shared.
It's not projecting.
It did project.
It's not been shared. Okay. Now can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Apologies, everyone. Okay, so cultural capital, I look at the idea of cultural capital as a resource. And it is supported by an individual's habitus, or basically the home or school habits that we inculcate, that are inculcated, that are repeated constantly, so much so that it becomes part of us. Examples of reading habitus includes parents who read, bring their children to the library, read with their children. And from a resource perspective, students who have this access to reading resources are more likely to pick up reading as a habit. And I like to mention here that cultural capital may include being able to communicate in more than one language. Although I am talking specifically about Singapore, I do think that we need to think about the idea that really it's about more than one language as well. And it depends on the context in which it is being used. And what the language is, as well as how much you know, is important insofar as the field that the language is being picked up in. So the field over time in terms of Singapore's educational language development, in case you didn't know, for those of you who are not from Singapore, Malay, it was actually Singapore's national language. But in the 1970s and 80s, there was a decline of the vernacular schools. And when Singapore became independent in 1965, it subsequently followed with a national system of education. And there was a bilingual policy with English as the main language of school. And it was so much so, people started using English so much so that Pakia called Singaporeans English-knowing bilinguals. Singaporeans who knew English and was able to use their mother tongue, which could be Chinese, Malay, Tamil, some other language. And by 2016, Singapore English had become the most common home language in Singapore schools. There's this diagram here. I think all you need to see is basically, if you look at the first line, in 1980, 11.6% of the population aged 5 years and above spoke English most frequently at home. And by 2015, 36.9% spoke English most frequently at home. And I belong to that 36.9%. So here my ethnography starts. I look at my grandma. She was not born in China, but her mother came over from Guangzhou to Singapore, and she was born in 1925 in Singapore. And she was a principal of a Chinese medium school in Singapore. And just recently I spoke to her. She's 95 years old. And she said, well, you know, she used to teach morning classes and then afternoon classes, come back to breastfeed, and then she would have to teach night classes. And she had 7 children. And I thought, well, my life isn't so bad. She really had it worse than me. But for her, if you looked at her embodied cultural capital, she enjoyed reading. And her objectified cultural capital, books in the nearby bookstore. She didn't have her own books, okay, but she would go to a nearby bookstore and the shopkeeper allowed her to read the books. And she went to a nearby primary school to loan the books there to read. But for her, very much of it was in Chinese. And then second generation, there was my dad, and he would have to travel from Sembawang all the way to Thomson Road. In the roads in Singapore back then, it would be an hour-plus journey. And later, he began to work in a bank. My dad was also educated in the Chinese medium. And for him, he loved reading for knowledge. News reading in Chinese is a habit he still continues to have in this day. And if you see cultural capital as something that passed from one generation to another, you can see that love of knowledge, that love of reading, as well as that access to books coming down from my grandmother. Third generation, that's me, born in 1975. And here is where you see the shift. That's that picture of me, I think maybe when I was 14 or 15 in my school uniform. And I attended a convent school where English was basically the language that most of our classmates communicated in. And if you see that highlighted book over there, it's my mom's copy of Word Power Made Easy. And it was a book she got us to read, and I faithfully read it and understand what were the different root words there. And that was part of my cultural capital. My mom also brought us a lot to the library, and we would make use of the library. I don't remember having so many books at home, but we made use of the public library system in Singapore, and I borrowed a lot of books and have very fond memories. And later I went on to do my master's and PhD in the UK and the US. So here you see the shift in cultural capital, that there is still the idea of enjoying reading. But in terms of family shifts, you see the shift from Chinese to English, you also see the shift in terms of access to books. From my grandma, who really had to make use of whatever was around her to get books, to me, where I could go to the library and borrow books from the library quite easily. And of course, my children born in the 2000s, they're 9 and 11 right now. And if you look at this, they're born into a family where English, my husband and I both speak in English. And for them, in terms of the books they have lots of books at home. They have books in the public library. They have books in their school. In fact, during the circuit breaker and even before the circuit breaker, the COVID-19 period, they were reading books online made available by the National Library Board. So I think if you just look at my family reading histories, some of the reflections I have are this, is that the linguistic forms of cultural capital do shift in different fields. So you see that shift from Chinese to English within my family itself. And I wonder if, there will be a loss of that bilingualism. I don't think so. But, there is that shift, and therefore, as a family, I need to be aware of that. And if you think about the global context, is being bilingual just as important as being able to speak English well? Will that see a shift in the way different kinds of capital are valued? Reading is consistent cultural capital, and it has value, particularly in a world where reading is becoming even more important, because even as you're participating in this, you're listening to me, but you also have to be able to read. We go online to look at various forms of information. And I think what you see with my children and our histories is that we have the advantage of amplifying the forms of cultural capital. I benefit from my grandmother and my father, and my children benefit from my cultural capital. So when they start off, they're better off than somebody with less. So it's kind of like a multiplication. I think even as I think about it, and for Singapore being a first world country and having so much, I do think that there are individuals with differently resourced beginnings, families who come from homes where they have less, and therefore they have different starting points. And in terms of my research, that is something that I'm really concerned with. So in my research, I'm starting to ask questions such as, what does it mean to have equitable distribution and access to resources? If somebody has less than my child at home and less in terms of having a role model at home to read or having access to the library, because although we do have libraries situated across different parts of Singapore, how are these libraries actually being used? Can we make them more well used? Can we help to use certain families reach out more to these resources in society, or reach out to them? I think there are implications for me as an educator. I need to ask, what is it that I am teaching my pre-service teachers in Singapore? Do I help them to understand the different kinds of resources that they have to help their students? One of the things that I have learned in my research is that actually teachers need to know books. They need to know children's books, they need to know young adult literature, then they can recommend these books to their students to motivate their students to read. And perhaps that is one thing I need to do more in my teaching of pre-service teachers. And finally, what does it mean to have reading futures? I don't have an answer to that, but that is a question I leave you with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenny. Thanks. We'll move to the final speaker for the first session. By the way, I didn't quite mention it earlier. This first session is under the larger title of Literacy, Policy and Practice. Yeah. So we will move to Dr. Faye Dorcas Yong from the Open University of Hong Kong in Hong Kong. Faye, over to you, please.
Hello. Can you see me?
Yep, we can hear you. So if you'd like to share your screen.
Can you see the screen now? The shared screen?
Yeah.
The slide. Okay, good. Okay. Right.
is indeed my honor to be part of this book project as well as this literacy webinar. Thank you so much, Suli, for including me. My book chapter, as I go along, I felt that I have been a little ambitious in what I try to cover. So basically, I have taken a historical approach and trying to look at how the English language as a subject and also literature in English as a subject and also English language in the whole Hong Kong education scene and how it has developed since the post-war years up till today. And from that historical perspective, I also looked at how my family and myself are positioned within all these changes over the years. And overall, it has been a very interesting, a lot of new discovery for myself, and as well as it being a very humbling realization of how my family or my own experience positioned within all the development and the changes. And I'm sure probably a lot of us who are working for this book, as we look back on our own autobiographical experiences, we do realize we do gain a new sort of perspective of how the micro experience is related to all the macro changes and development along the way. And so that was a very humbling and very, very enriching discovery on my part. And the other discovery that I had, or more like a sort of a confirmation of what I've always known. Hong Kong has always been caught in between the clashes of superpowers, and those are the factors that sort of will always affect how Hong Kong positions herself and also how English is being seen in our society. So in my chapter, I basically have tried to give an overview of the contextual factors that affect the English language in Hong Kong society, as well as all the factors that contributed to the development of English education in as a subject and also as a medium of instruction in our education system. So these are some of the factors that I mentioned in my chapter. So from the post-war era onwards, it's similar to all the Asian countries. All societies are trying to rebuild itself after the war, and Hong Kong is no exception. The only unique thing that I see in Hong Kong is that we have a massive population increase in the first 30 years after Second World War, partly because north of our border, China was still very politically unstable with the ongoing civil war and also the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s. So within the first 20 to 30 years after the war, from 1945 to 1970s, our population has increased from 600,000 to like 4.3 million. And most of these people are Cantonese speaking or Chinese speaking. So perhaps people always have this impression that Hong Kong being a British colony since 1841, English has always and should definitely play a very important role in Hong Kong society. But the fact is that the English language has been important in the officialdom and also in international trade, but the majority of the population are mostly Cantonese speaking. And hello? Is that okay? Is everything okay?
Yeah, carry on.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So English is I guess it has never sort of achieved it has never reached the way that is so commonly used among, for example, like in Singapore, where quite a majority of the people use English as their everyday language. In fact, Hong Kong has never been like that, and Cantonese has always been the major everyday language. And actually, the colonial government in the 1930s, like before the war, they have already recognized that and has recommended that English shouldn't really be used as a medium of instruction, and schools should be, or education should be provided in the vernacular, which is Cantonese. But then due to another historical reason, which is the missionary organizations that has set up schools in Hong Kong and the government's heavy dependence on them for rebuilding the education system after the war, has sort of reinforce the position of English in our education system, because these missionary schools, they are mostly of UK, US, or Irish background, and they insisted in offering Anglo-Chinese, which is like English education. And but of course, so the grant schools or these missionary schools, they have ensured that the Anglo-Chinese curriculum has always have a position in Hong Kong. But at the same time, because the population has increased in such a fast rate, and most of them are a Chinese-speaking population. On the other, the government also allows a lot of vernacular schools to be established. So there was, in fact, there's these parallel tracks of the English and the vernacular education going on in Hong Kong. So looking back at my own family's history, I later on, like after writing this chapter, that I realized so my parents and myself and my brother, we received education, and we received an Anglo-Chinese education, and which as a child you thought everyone is like you, right? Everybody experienced the same thing like yourself, and given before the change of sovereignty in 1997, on paper 94% of Hong Kong schools are registered as Anglo-Chinese schools, and which means they are practically offering education in English. And I thought, oh, okay, so like the majority of us are studying English. But later on, we realized that was actually the minority. The minority I was in the 1/3 minority, so to say. So it was kind of a very interesting like discovery on my part. And then, right, and there are other political significant incidents that sort of seals the position of English in Hong Kong society, such as the signing of the Sino-British Joint Declaration in 1984, which, of course, it sort of seals Hong Kong's fate in the change of sovereignty in 1987, but at the same time, it also officiated or guarantees the English language as an official language in Hong Kong. And so those are the socio-political, like the contextual factors that that influences the position of Hong Kong, influences the position of the English language in Hong Kong society. And at the same time, in the world of ESL, the pedagogy has changed and has developed. And in Hong Kong, the English language education also follows the change of these pedagogical trends. So, for example, in the 70s, the audiolingual approach has been in vogue, and the behaviorist learning theory was in fashion at the time. So it is also reflected in Hong Kong's English language curriculum. And later on in the 80s, when the communicative language teaching became popular, it also appears in our own curriculum reform. And in the 90s onwards, task-based approach became a new trend. So we can see that the Hong Kong English language education is moving along this trend from a more form-focused approach to a more meaning-focused approach. And it also reflects a certain society, it also reflects the society's demand for what kind of English language users the society is expecting the education system to produce. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And some of the major education initiatives that shapes that comes along are the medium of instruction policy and the net scheme. So this, I included a picture of a textbook that my mother used to use. This is actually an adaptation from the Malaya version. Maybe some of you could recognize this, a man and a pen. Right, so I'll quickly wrap up this very important initiative of the net scheme. So the government kind of, our government kind of changes the medium of instruction policy from English to Chinese at the change of the sovereignty. But to compensate or to placate most of the parents and especially the business world, they have like vastly expanded the native speaking English teachers scheme to compensate for the loss of language environment in the schools. So that was something that I've discussed in length in my chapter as well. And finally, on the literature in English, so I thought I could have talked a bit more about it, but in actual fact, it is such a marginalized subject which doesn't receive much research attention, and it has always been seen as an elite subject that only those grant schools or the very traditional elite schools would offer this subject. And in terms of the percentage of students who are taking this subject, it accounts for less than 1% of the whole our O-levels equivalent exam, which is the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education. And it was partly, it makes me reflect upon like this idea of being literate and why literature seems to have a very small, doesn't have much position in the whole English language education. And it was kind of replaced by this concept of language arts in the curriculum. But then it doesn't seem that literature has been, or the cultural aspect of the language itself doesn't seem to have received much much attention in the whole curriculum as a whole. And that also was something that I've discussed in my chapter. And right, so basically, yeah, it was an attempt of a historical overview of the past 70 years or so of English language education in Hong Kong, with a bit of personal anecdotes in it. And so I hope this would be of interest to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faye. Right, so in the original sort of program for today, we've put the 6 chapter authors first, again under the umbrella of literacy, policy and practice. So we'll take, say, about 5 minutes to see if, we've got questions. We haven't gotten any questions in the chat box, but, feel free to, whether to raise your hand or to just turn on your microphone and ask any questions that you may have. We'll take it for 5 minutes and then we'll move on to the next set of speakers.
Hello?
Hello. Could you tell us your name? It's Butaka, isn't it?
Yes.
Hi, Butaka. Would you like to tell everyone else your name and where you're from?
Okay. I would rather say good afternoon, because here it is already morning in Nigeria.
Okay.
Yeah, it's early morning. My name is Muttaka Wishau. I'm in the Education and Training Department of the Nigerian Labour Congress here in Nigeria.
Right. Yes.
It is, I think, a great conversation around literacy and what being literate is all about. I think I am privileged to be part of this conference. So the question I would like to ask is in the previous speaker. I couldn't get the name, but she talks about the theoretical position of the habitus capital. So I'm interested in knowing, while she was talking about the objectified capital, the institutional capital, and the habitus, I would like to, how will she respond to the changing nature of the field, especially e-learning? How will she try to look at this changing nature of both the capital, the objectified capital, the books, as a cultural embodiment of reading, and how e-learning is also shaping that? That is the first question. Then the second question goes to the last speaker, also on the literature being elitist. What will you see? Is it not because other traditions have been neglected historically, like the oral tradition, which of course shaped the literature and what being literate mean? Because historically, people that, especially people that are not literate in a sense in English, they have oral tradition. Most of the things in terms of their prose, poetry, they compose it using oral tradition. So how do you respond to that? As is it not that these people in the margin have been neglected? So these are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mutaka. I think Chini, that first question is for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for the question, because I think actually that is a really important question that you have asked in terms of, you know, what is it about technology that we need to consider for thinking about cultural capital. I think the first thing before I answer that question is to say that when we think about cultural capital as resource, it is not to point to who has this or who does not have this. But in my research on reading and school libraries, I have discovered that when we think about the resource angle, we stop looking at the student as the problem, right? And then we start saying, how can we better resource the problem? So in terms of physical books, what we have found in Singapore, and I'm working with the Ministry of Education on, is that we're improving school libraries, because if these students are not able to go to the public library or do not go to the public library for some reason, or they do not have books at home, the school library is a place that they can go to. To answer the second question about the field, the interesting thing is that I'm actually doing a study now that looks at reading on print and digitally during the pandemic itself. And I just did quite a thorough review looking at the research on print and reading on print and digitally over the last 10 years. And I think one of the things that have come up, themes that have come out quite clearly in the research, is that just because stuff is available on technology doesn't mean that everybody is reading them or everybody's reading the same stuff. And the other thing that is also important to note, that in different contexts, technology could serve a different role. So maybe I will use Singapore as an example, because that is where I am. It is a developed country where there is, generally most people have access to a phone and a computer. And our National Library Board has made many books available online. But what we are finding is that in terms of actually using these books, it tends to be more of families from the high socioeconomic status. When I say high, middle or high socioeconomic status, which means that even technology is being used unequally in terms of reading of books. Okay, I'm not talking about reading of news. There are other sorts of forms, so I'm just limiting it to that. So I think then, as an educator, what occurred to me in terms of school closures is that in Singapore, what happened with the school closure was that there was a lot of emphasis on completing the curriculum, but not a lot of emphasis on reading. But we know that in order for students to get better at reading and they actually need to enjoy the reading. So I think in terms of sort of an educational response that we can have then is, you know, as we plan for these online learning programs in Singapore, do we then integrate reading? You know, for example, have reading programs, have read alouds. Do we recommend students go to these online resources to read them? Do we, when we are not in the online space, do we in the offline space in school teach students how to use the technology to read and not just for the other things? So it's actually quite a complex issue, but I'm glad you brought it up, because I think that when we engage with the notion of the field in today's day and age, we do need to think about the role of technology, but also remember that it's technology, print, and all the other things put together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chini. I'd suggest that Mutaka's question, the second question for Faye, that we put it in the second session, because as in the next session, because the next session covers literature, texts, and contexts. Yeah. So Faye, hang on to your answer. What we'll do is we'll get the speakers on for the second session first, and then Faye, you come on to answer that question within this session. So let's come back to the speakers. I would like to call upon Associate Professor Dr. Xiaofei Shi, Soochow University, China. Xiaofei, over to you, but I will be putting up your slides for you, yeah?
Okay, thank you very much, Suli. Thank you. And also I'm wondering if I say next line or next slide, could you please turn it for me?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so I will start now. Hello, everybody. Today I will talk about from the Lianhuanhua to the picture book, a glimpse into the evolution of literacy education and research in China. So the next slide. Suli, next slide, please.
I'm trying to move the slide. I'm not sure why it's not moving.
Okay.
So sorry, let me try again.
Probably an internet connection. Or yes, this one.
Great.
So as you can see from this one, the picture on the left is a photo of me reading when I was around 2 years old, while the picture on the right shows my daughter, now aged 2, reading one of her favorite books. So it's a book about various kinds of caterpillars. When I was growing up, the Lianhuanhua, which means linked serial pictures, was used with children who were moving towards literacy. While for children of my daughter's generation, the most common reading material was the picture book. So in the following, I will very briefly compare the Lianhuanhua that I loved and the picture book that my daughter reads, and hope this may provide a glimpse into how literacy education and research in China have evolved over years. So next slide, please.
For some reason, Xiaofei, I'm unable to. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So both the Lianhuanhua and the picture book, they contain words and images, but except this similarity, they are very different. So as you can see from this slide, this is an example of a Lianhuanhua adapted from the classic Chinese novel called Dream of the Red Chamber. And this is also my childhood favorite. It is pocket-sized, so I think it's roughly the size of my palm. It's pocket-sized. It starts with a colorful front page, but is printed on soft paper in black and white within. And it's quite long. It has around 120 to 180 pages. And the next slide, please. However, the picture book has various sizes, from as small as the palm to larger than a piece of A4 paper. This picture shows the cover of Dear Zoo and a few pages inside it. So this is also the one that I'm reading with my daughter now. And different from the black and white Lianhuanhua, the picture book contains as many colors as can be imagined. It's also much shorter, usually 32 to 40 pages. And the materials for the picture book range from paper, soft or hardboard. And for this book, Dear Zoo is printed on hardboard paper, to resilient plastic or cloth. Dream is for children on the point of moving towards advanced literacy, while Dear Zoo is marketed for preschool children. The next one, please. Well, the comparative study of Dream and Zoo reviews the first trend in contemporary China's literacy education, that is, growing emergent literacy education. Emergent literacy education refers to the education of reading and writing skills for children under 6. The global community started attaching importance to emergent literacy education from around 1925, but it has become the focus of wider interest in China only in the recent 3 decades. The next line, please. The Ministry of Education released the National Guidelines for Kindergarten Education in 2001, which included emergent literacy education as a compulsory task for any kindergarten. So you can see it's quite late, only in 2001. Today's bookstores, online retailers, and reading promoters target young child readerships, including newborns, and it's a huge commercial success. But compared to the commercial success of the picture books used for emergent literacy education, relevant academic research is disproportionately deficit in China. It did not start until the beginning of the 21st century and is still far from a burgeoning field. So the next line, please. A search in the database of China National Knowledge Infrastructure, which is the largest database in China for academic studies. This is a key national information construction project supported by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Science. Well, the search yields only around 100 related articles in the past 15 years, and the majority of which work with children in kindergarten, leaving out toddlers under. Well, I think probably one challenge for Chinese scholars researching emergent literacy education arises from the pictographic system of Chinese characters. So next slide, please. Yes. And next one. But there's one, next line, please. So there should be a box containing, yes, this one. Well, there's one related research. Well, in this research, the researchers use eye tracking and Chinese picture books with preschoolers. And in their study, they find that while phonemic awareness is probably the most important predictor of children's literacy education in alphabetic-centric linguistic systems, visual skills seem to be more important for Chinese children. Well, because of the inherent pictographic nature of the Chinese language. So I think research like this that takes into account the pictographic system of Chinese characters is much needed in the future. Well, also the move from the Lianhuanhua to the picture book shows an increasing emphasis on multiliteracies in China's literacy education. Well, this is the second trend. Well, multi in the term multiliteracies has two layers of meaning. While the first multi emphasizes that it's no longer enough to focus solely on the national language, while the second multi connects to multimodality, that is how written linguistic modes of meaning interface with oral, visual, audio, gestural, tactile, and spatial patterns of meaning. Well, obviously, as you can see, dream is written in Chinese, while zoo in English. While this reflects a shift from literacy education mostly in Chinese to that with an equal emphasis on English. And English is now among the 3 most important subjects of the college entrance examination. And in the CNKI database, as much as 80% of picture book studies that have higher citation rates revolve around the teaching and learning of English. So all of this may demonstrate that the use of original English picture books aims to cultivate literacy in the English language. The next line, please. But regarding the second multi, that is multimodality, the picture book lends itself to a more multimodal reading experience than the Lianhuanhua. While the body of a Lianhuanhua is black and white, picture books have various different colors. And also, picture books often use paper engineering to heighten the sense of reading as a tactile and spatial experience. So could you please, yes, click? Yes, so you can see from this picture, Dear Zoo, this picture book incorporates the device of flaps to stimulate for a child the experience of opening a door. So this is called paper engineering, and it testifies to reading picture books as a more multimodal experience. Well, the contemporary visual term, noted by scholars since the 1980s, makes increasing demands on one's ability to make meaning from and express through various communications media. The next line, please. In China, the Ministry of Education released the latest national curriculum for the subject of Chinese literature and culture. So one course unit focuses on cultivating students' ability to retrieve, represent, and express information across different media, to understand how various media resources may be deployed, and to evaluate the objectivity and ideology of the messages conveyed in mass media. So this version of national curriculum distinguishes itself from the previous versions by elevating multiliteracies to an unprecedented level. The next slide, please. Well, this very brief comparative study summarized here leads us to find 2 positive changes in China's literacy education. The next slide, please. Click again, please. Well, this is also the 2 trends that I have covered so far, that is growing emergent literacy and the emphasis on multiliteracies. But there are also 3 issues. Yes, please click 3 times. Yes, thank you. So the first is, the lack of emergent literacy research, especially in terms of how very young children deal with inherently pictographic nature of Chinese characters, especially for toddlers under 3, while the research is especially lacking. And the second issue is the absence of ethnic minority languages and cultures in literacy education. So now we have a literacy education in Chinese and English is basically the predominant language worldwide. But what about Chinese ethnic minority languages and cultures? We can't, even find them in today's literacy education. Well, the third issue is whether the traditional narrative form of Lianhuanhua still has its value in today's and future literacy education, because Lianhuanhua is now a collector's favorite, but different from picture books. Picture books are very popular nowadays. So what's the future role of the Lianhuanhua in China's literacy education? Well, this is the issue that we should consider. And this issue has already been addressed in the chapter. So I think I will leave you to read the upcoming book. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Xiaofei.
Suli. Thank you, Suli.
Thank you.
So I will turn off the video. Yes.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next speaker. We come back to Malaysia. So we have Associate Professor Dr. Dahlia Janan from University Pendidikan Sultan Idris in Malaysia. Dahlia?
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
And your slide is there. Just make sure that it's put out.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah.
So I'm hearing it now. So I'm Dahlia Janan from Malaysia. So I will talk about my experience as someone who have a difficulty in early reading. So and because of that shaped me or built up my interest in doing research on matching readers and text. But firstly, I would like to say thank you to Suli for having me in this presentation and the chapter as well. And it's a privilege to present to all of you. So currently, if I give you a glimpse of my chapter, so I'm a struggle reader when I was starting school. I don't know how to read because I came from a poor, below 40, what we call in Malaysia, below 40 groups. So I didn't go for any preschool before I start school. So yeah, because of that, when I go in standard 1, which is 7 years old in Malaysia, but I don't know the rest in the other parts of the world. So I saw my friends reading, and it's really wonderful when they retell their story. But it's so sad that I can't understand the words in the books, and I don't know how to read. So when this occurred, I feel that I'm left out. But one day I came across a book that made me really want to read the book. So the book is Li Simon. So this book that I showed in my presentation is the book that I really want to read 42 years ago. And it's kind of emotional kind of thing for me now, because I feel that from someone with a background, not a privileged one, and able to read and able to present to you now is something huge for me. All right. What I can say here that if we nowadays, if we tend to read on journals that they will put out that normally children would like to read if the sentences is short, if the book with color pictures and everything. But for myself, as a struggle reader, I find it a different way, because I find it that this particular silly Simon that I really, really want to read is because it's funny. Because I just see the pictures, I can't read. But I really want to read this book, even though the sentences in the book is difficult. So when I grow up, and then after, because of this silly Simon, I really want to read. I asked my friend to ask me to teach me how to read, and then I can read, and it's like a click. So if you read my chapter, there will be there that explain how I get into this. Become a reader, right? So after my own experience, my early experience, I am very much into wanting to know how am I going to match a reader to text. Because I am a struggle reader myself, and I want to help others. How am I going to help them? And this is how I built myself in my research. So in my research and in doing my research during my PhD research, so I came across to a notion of the interaction between the readers and the text will be called a readability. And this is the topic that I've been doing research before my PhD and after my PhD. In the chapter that I wrote for the book, for our book, I explain how in my PhD years, I developed a model where there's a factors that affecting people how when they are interact with the text. So these factors is being researched during my PhD. So these factors that affects readers, if we can look at the factors, is just a simple one. We thought it's a simple one. It's a genre, author, but to understand how actually the reader encounter with this and really become engaged with what they are reading is not really easy. And I'm still trying to find ways how this interaction take place between readers and the text. If we can see in my slides, if we thought that this interaction between readers and the text that I developed during my PhD is in English background, because I did my PhD in UK and all my data is a UK data where I went to schools in UK. After I came back to Malaysia, so I feel I want to do a research that compare two different contexts, whether the model that previously I developed during my PhD will be have some use for Malay language context, because this model that I have developed is in English context. So when I come back to Malaysia to do a research, so I compare the data that I collected previously in UK
Dahlia, we've lost your
yes,
audio. Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I was saying that the research was in the English context, and I want to see whether the model that being built in English will be applicable in Malay language. So this research that take place in Malaysia is with Malay language as their first language, which is Aina, and Sabrina was the data that I collected in UK. And then how I'm going to see how these two case interact with the text is the first data is in interview data, which is interview data. If you can see here is how Aina or how Sabrina will talk about the book they like to read. So from this analysis, I find it that, well, these two data show me almost the same thing, and the model is applicable for a Malay language. Because I want to know a deep understanding for their comprehension of the book that they choose to read. So I do a miscue analysis as well. You can see the analysis later in the book. So from the analysis, I predict how these two cases really get engaged with what they are reading, and how the both of them give me a glimpse of whether the model that I develop in English really useful or is really different from Malay. But when I see from the data came from the interview and from the miscue analysis, I can see that both of these cases are taking me or drive me to see the model. Yes, the model can be applied to both languages. Later, I also take a data on retelling. Then these children, if you can see, they are very different because they are from different world, and it's really wonderful that we can see how different continent, different culture, but at the same time, it still drive us at the same factor when it comes to reading. But when I look into the data more, and I find that as people in Asia, as what our book is trajectory, as the Asian trajectory, I find that the data might be different if we look into Tamil and Chinese readings, especially when we see how Chinese and Tamils have different way of writing characters. So I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that the model that being the model that been developed previously, yes, it is applicable for Malay language, but it opened up an area of research whether the model is useful or not for second or foreign language. For this, I end my presentation, and I would love to have any collaborators from whoever is on this webinar to do further research with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dahlia. Right, we'll move on to the next speaker. I'd like to call upon Dr. Priscilla Cruz from Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines. Prixie?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prixie, and as Suli said, I come from the Philippines. Can you see my my presentation?
Yep, it's coming through, I think.
Is it coming through?
Is that yours?
No, I don't think that's mine.
She might have, Prixie, you might have shared your screen by mistake instead of the presentation.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay, there, I got it. Thank you. Sorry about that. So good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to talk about today is some of the work I've done that actually addresses the problems that I have as a teacher of literature. I've been teaching English and teaching literature in English for almost 20 years now, and some problems actually persist. So I decided to do some research to try to work out these issues and come to my own answers. So my talk is called Articulating Abstractions, Building Teacher-Student Connections in the Literature Classroom. What I'd like to do in this talk is put the spotlight on the interpretative task, which is usually the tasks that students have to do in a literature classroom. So in all my years of teaching literature, students are often asked to produce an interpretation of a literary text given by a teacher. However, in my experience, I've seen several issues. For one thing, just last semester, I had a student who started to perceive haiku as being about monsters. And I didn't quite know how to react in a way that would affirm his perspective, but also at the same time, affirm the perspective of my institution, which has some very specific ideas about teaching literature. So some of the issues that affect the literature classroom and the interpretative task would be, for one thing, a teacher brings her own perspective to a literary text. There's also the institutional perspective. In other papers, I've argued that literary texts are actually selected because they express certain values that the institution holds dear and feels they need to teach the students. As I've been a literature student also for a long time, there's also the position of the student feeling like she has to guess what the teacher wants to say or the interpretation that the teacher wants the students to produce. Finally, students have their own personal thoughts and reactions. Every time I encounter a literary text, I react to it in different and very personal ways. So it's this straddling between standards that a teacher has to uphold and what the students themselves feel they want to express that I thought to work on in this chapter. For this research, what I did was I invited 4 people who are fairly familiar and have a fairly expert level at interpreting literature. 2 of them are teachers of literature, while 2 graduated with a literature degree. I participated in my own study, so I was the 5th participant. What I did is I gave us all a literary text, and then I asked us all, myself included, to write a brief interpretation of that text. So the results, and they're not surprising. No 2 participants came up with the same interpretation. We had some similarities, like many of us actually, or all of us, zeroed in on certain images in the text that was given, but we all came to a different understanding. So there were similarities, but only very general ones. All of us seem to apply what is known as a close reading of the text. In other words, an interpretation of the text that is built on grammar or a close attention to the language of the text. Now, these findings are really not surprising. After all, we're different people. So what did I think this meant for the literature class? Teachers themselves would not agree on an interpretation of a literary text. And that might be a problem, especially when there is an institutional exam with expected outcomes and expected student answers. So teachers themselves will not agree. A high-level ability to do close reading or the ability to understand the language of the text or to engage with vocabulary and grammar will also produce different interpretations. From what I saw in the data that I gathered, interpretation involves a lot of play. So the participants played with words, played with meanings, played with images, played with ideas, mentioned things from their own life. So because the way we read literature is a personal one, it's not surprising that the 5 of us did not agree. But then again, what does this mean for the literature class? And what does that mean for teachers like me? Another thing that I noticed is close reading seems to be as much a position as it is a skill. It seems to arise from a general position on the text that the reader has in mind as soon as he or she finishes reading the text. The skill now comes in to what extent that person can defend the interpretation. So from what I saw, the defense of the interpretation is actually more important than what the interpretation itself is. So to me, this means it might be counterproductive for teachers to expect only a narrow range of acceptable interpretations, or to promote a narrow range of certain interpretations or positions. So what to do? In my chapter, I used the approach of grammatics, which means I examined all the interpretations written through a linguistic lens. In other words, I wanted to find out what is happening in the process of the interpretation as it is manifested in language choices. So one of the things I noticed is all of us participants offered something called an abstraction, or in the work of Mary Macken-Horaric and Systemic Functional Linguistics, this is referred to as a relational meaning or a symbolic meaning. So I think what teachers have to do is clarify what an abstraction is. So that means a clear focus on symbolic meaning right at the start of a class. In my experience, literature teachers tend to start by looking at what are known as the formal elements of poetry or fiction. So they start discussing plot and character. However, what seems to happen when an interpretation is given is an articulation of a symbolic meaning. So symbols, or the sense of engaging with symbols, has to start immediately with any literature class. My problem of the student saying that haiku were about monsters, in particular about werewolves, is not quite an abstraction because that's not really symbolic. He meant it literally. Now, the other thing that teachers can do and help their students do is to practice articulating abstraction through the right types of grammatical clauses. And finally, there is the need to practice defending these abstractions and working on those abstractions with evidence. This is why, although it's good to accept a lot of different abstractions in a class, it's not an anything goes thing. Because as you think through the evidence given by the text, you also think through your own abstraction about the text. This is similar to the finding that Harrison came up with in his book on understanding reading development, where he pointed out that how you comprehend a text gets better and gets deeper the more you read and read. So that is something, to me, that teachers can do. So clarify the abstraction or in what it means, practice articulating it, and practice defending it. So at the end of my paper, I started thinking of what it meant to cultivate a love of literature. And in the classroom, I think that means we need a lot of space to accept a variety of abstractions. But do remember, this is not an anything goes thing. But there should also be the space to change teacher talk. For one thing, and I look back in the mistakes that I made as a literature teacher, I think opening a class or asking students what they think of a text or what they think a certain character does or what they think of a certain character may not be a good way to start, because the effect of that on the student is perhaps this problem of thinking, will my answer be correct? So instead of that kind of teacher talk, I would think that one way to start is for the teacher herself to offer an abstraction and then ask the students to offer their own, and then discuss the different ideas that are happening or that are being mentioned. I actually tried this in my class in my university's June-July semester. And I found it to be quite helpful because a lot of the students now would start bringing out their own ideas, which I didn't actually ask for, but they sure deepened the discussion. So that's the other thing. We need space to talk about personal ideas about the text and personal ideas about literature. I think many of us already know that loving literature is really a personal experience, and that is what has to be brought to the classroom. Now, the question is how that can be done while at the same time upholding the standards that any school feels like its students have to uphold. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Right, we shall move to the next speaker. Dr. Grace, well, full name would be Dr. Grace Lim Jia Wei from University Malaya in Malaysia. Grace?
Yep. Hang on, I need to choose my PowerPoint slide. Okay, good morning, afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I hope you've been having a good time listening to all the presenters, which I find fascinating. So a short introduction on myself. I'm Grace Lim, currently a lecturer with the Department of Language and Literacy Education, University of Malaya. I have to explain a little bit about how I got involved with the book. You see, my research area is actually on literature education, meaning I research on the teaching and learning of literature. So when Suli asked me to be part of this book, Asian Trajectories for Literacy, it did pop into my head, like how do I relate my research to the intention of the book? And then it struck me that there is actually a very large spectrum of literacy experiences in Malaysia. So we have, and you have heard from the presenters so far, like Dahlia, you have readers who struggle learning the language and picking up reading. I come from, I guess you would say, the other end of the spectrum, or if we go back to what Mukhlis has talked about, the analogy he gave about crossing the stream, I think I was given at least a rowboat in that sense. So my experience with literacy is quite different, but nonetheless Malaysian. So that's what I latched on in terms of formulating the idea for my chapter. So if we do take literacy as a social cultural practice, especially reading, I thought we could frame that through an exploration of literature in English as a school subject in Malaysia. Because like Hong Kong, as Faye pointed out, literature is not a very popular subject amongst students in Malaysia. It is considered quite elitist. Not many people have access to the subject, even if they wanted to study it. But at the same time, there is a whole curriculum development program that goes into conceptualizing what literature is, coming up with the syllabus, coming up with the aims and objectives, and even further, coming up with the assessment. I noticed there was a comment talking about the washback effect in literature. So in my chapter, in the book actually, I take a much closer look at assessment in literature in English for post-secondary students in Malaysia. And I trace this based on my PhD, which Gabriel would know, from 1957, the year Malaysia got its independence, all the way up to 2012, I think. And literature in English has gone through multiple phases. So there is a historical development that reflects changes in how we think about literature. And within that are two questions that I've used to not only formulate my chapter, but as well as this presentation, which you will see right in the middle of my slide. I only have one slide, by the way. The big question, what books should we read as literature students? And the second question, how do we read those books? Yeah, so in my chapter, I go into more depth, I think, in exploring those questions, especially from a literary literacy perspective. But just for this presentation, I thought I would focus more on the biographical aspect of it, which I can use to reflect major points I wanted to highlight in terms of my chapter. So let's begin with the first point, which is before studying literature and English. So I grew up as a child with my own librarian. My librarian was my mother. So she would curate all the books that I would read. So she will always read them first before I even had a chance to get my hands on it. In that sense, she constructed, sculpted my reading experiences. And I read things like Enid Blyton, a lot of it, Famous Five, and all those books, Peter and Jane. I grew up reading on Peter and Jane. And then once I reached teenage years, I started choosing books for myself, which I found a very interesting exercise. So one of the books that I chose for myself was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And I would read it once every year. That was how fascinated I was with the text. And so that was what I read. How I read it was literally for enjoyment. I liked the story. I knew what was happening. I enjoyed it. I think it was a matter of immersion, imagination.